Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Cari Lea Farver. Cari Lea Farver was born on November 30th, 1974 in Macedonia, Nebraska, USA. After going through many relationships, she raised her son Maxwell alone. Cari Lea loved her son very much. Cari Lea spent a month in bed due to severe depression. Her mother, Nancy Rainey, helped take care of her son Maxwell. The complicated relationship with Maxwell's father along with the difficult living conditions caused Cari Lea, a young woman of 20 years old, to fall into an unstable psychological state. Doctors diagnosed Cari Lea with bipolar disorder. People with bipolar disorder often have two opposite psychological states. One moment they can feel overly excited, energetic and friendly, but then they can fall into a state of depression, frustration and helplessness. This disease causes them a lot of difficulties in daily life. However, in the early 2000s, Cari Lea's doctor found an effective treatment that allowed Cari Lea to live a normal life. In the fall of 2012, Cari Lea received a lucrative job offer in nearby Omaha, an opportunity she couldn't refuse. Cari Lea accepted the offer. However, her son, Maxwell, was in middle school and didn't want to change his familiar surroundings, so Maxwell decided to stay with his grandmother in Macedonia. One day in November 2012, Cari Lea met Dave Kroupa at the auto repair shop where he worked. When Dave looked at Cari Lea's Ford Explorer, he realized that he really liked this woman. Cari Lea was showing Dave something inside the car, and they stood close to each other, and there was a little tension. Not long after, Dave and Cari Lea went on a date. Cari Lea went to Dave's house. A while later, a woman named Liz called Dave a lot and texted him. Then Liz went to Dave's house to pick up something he had left for her. Dave explained to Cari Lea that Liz Golyar was the first person Dave met online in 2012. Liz, born in 1975 in Michigan, initially told Dave that she was not looking for a serious relationship because she was a mother and needed to spend most of her time with her children. In Dave and Liz's relationship, they had few topics to talk about, and their relationship was mainly physical. After a while, Liz began to worry about what Dave was doing when she was not around, as well as who he was seeing. Dave often reminded her that they were in an open relationship and that she should not worry. He also insisted that Liz was free to date other men. However, Liz was not happy with this and began to bother Dave more and more. Liz also felt jealous of Dave's children and their mother, Amy, because she could not understand the close relationship they had after the breakup. Eventually, Liz's actions upset Dave, and he decided to break up with her. Cari Lea sympathized with Dave, as everyone had relationships in the past, and Cari Lea did not let that affect their relationship, but Liz was clearly upset to see a strange woman in Dave's house. Liz, feeling that Dave was increasingly distancing himself from her, wrote text messages, emails, and called Dave. However, Dave would not stop seeing Cari Lea or anyone else because of Liz. 2 weeks after moving to her new job, Cari Lea began dating Dave. Cari Lea and Dave began spending more time together. Dave felt comfortable with Cari Lea around. Cari Lea said that she was not looking for a serious relationship, but just wanted to enjoy the good times together. In December 2015, Liz was shot. Liz probably guessed who it was. Luckily, the wound was not fatal. Liz thought, "This can't go on any longer, I have to do something." At 9:45 a.m. at work, Dave suddenly received a text message from Cari Lea. In the message, Cari Lea expressed her desire to live with Dave forever. The content of the message made Dave feel confused and surprised, because he did not understand the reason for Cari Lea's sudden change. Because before, they had discussed and agreed that both of them would not rush into a binding relationship. Dave gently replied to Cari Lea that he was not ready for this big change. Cari Lea's response was very unpleasant. When Dave returned to the apartment, he found that all of Cari Lea's belongings that she had brought were gone. This made him think that Cari Lea had left him. On the same day, Cari Lea deleted him from her Facebook friend list. Although it seemed like everything was over, it was not. Dave began receiving a series of text messages and emails from Cari Lea, which were full of curses and threats to ruin Dave's life. The messages were numerous and all of them were rude. In addition, Cari Lea did not show up for work. The strange messages from Cari Lea were not only sent to Dave, but also to her mother and 15-year-old son. In May 2013, Cari Lea posted a lengthy post on her personal Facebook page in which she wrote, she had answered enough questions to prove to everyone that she had had enough. You can either believe that she was a girl or leave her alone. She quit her volunteer job and she was fed up with people giving her a hard time. She just didn't want to go home right now. She was a grown woman, and if she wanted to leave home, she had every right to do so. Sorry for hurting everyone. Cari Lea then remained absent for a while. Her mother realized something was wrong when Cari Lea missed her own birthday, Max's birthday, and other family celebrations. Finally, when her father passed away. After a while, Liz Golyar began receiving messages from Cari Lea. In those messages, Cari Lea criticized and insulted Liz, even threatened Liz to stay away from Dave. To understand Cari Lea's strange behavior, Liz contacted Dave. He said he was also in a similar situation. Cari Lea sent him many messages and emails, in which Cari Lea accused Dave of all kinds of wrongdoing, called him a liar, and promised to avenge the pain he had caused Cari Lea. Gradually, the messages from Cari Lea became more threatening, with confusing content and grammatical errors. Cari Lea's mother insists that her daughter is not a hot-tempered person and has always been very careful in writing letters and documents. Cari Lea pays attention to spelling and presentation. Is her bipolar disorder relapsing and developing into something more serious? After Cari Lea's confusing actions, all the evidence points to Cari Lea having psychological difficulties. Liz and Dave often receive hundreds of text messages and emails, even when they are together. Their phones constantly buzz with messages, which makes them both uncomfortable. Although they continue to date, Dave feels uncomfortable around Liz. She becomes more and more demanding, despite always insisting that Liz is fine with their no-strings-attached relationship. In January 2013, Dave found Cari Lea's car in his front yard. Dave called the police and reported the incident. The police came to check the car and found no suspicious signs. The police then turned the car over to Cari Lea's parents. Cari Lea continued to text Dave and Liz. Cari Lea even started sending pictures of Dave's children and threatening to harm them. As time went on, Cari Lea continued to stalk them. Liz became increasingly jealous, made Dave angry and tired of the situation, and finally decided to end the relationship with Liz. In August 2013, Liz reported a fire at her house, which killed all of her pets, including a snake, a cat, and 2 dogs. Liz told the police that Cari Lea had repeatedly threatened her through text messages and emails. So she suspected Cari Lea of starting the fire. The police seized Dave and Liz's cell phones. Someone damaged Dave's auto repair shop and threw a brick through the window. Dave felt threatened, so he bought a gun to protect himself. After a while, Amy Flora, Dave's ex-wife, also began receiving threatening messages from Cari Lea, because Dave often spent time with the children and met Amy. The police became suspicious for reasons that were hard to understand. Dave had only dated Cari Lea for less than 2 weeks, but had been following him and his ex-girlfriends for 3 years. Meanwhile, Cari Lea's family had not seen her for 3 years, and were trying to find her, using every method possible. In 2015, these efforts paid off. Police officers Ryan Avis and Jim Doty volunteered to investigate Cari Lea Farver's disappearance. However, they found no evidence that Cari Lea was alive. It was unusual for an adult to pack up and leave without spending any money. No one had seen her, and no one had heard her voice. This was very strange. With the assistance of Anthony Kawa, digital forensics administrator at the Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office, police analyzed the contents of Dave and Liz's phones. In 2013, Anthony reported that Cari Lea Farver had sent more than 50,000 text messages and 15,000 emails to Dave over the course of 3 years. Anthony also said that those impersonating Cari Lea were becoming more sophisticated in their operations, trying to hide their IP addresses and real identities. It seems that someone knew what they were doing and had access to various computer programs. In December 2015, Liz Golyar contacted the police to report that she had been shot in the leg outside her home. She determined that the attacker was not Cari Lea but Dave's ex-wife Amy Flora. Furthermore, Dave had a missing gun that Amy may have taken. It is possible that Amy was behind Cari Lea's disappearance. A clue in the investigation indicates that people associated with Dave were being harassed. It is possible that Amy, having had a difficult life after breaking up with Dave, the father of her children, decided to take revenge and eliminate all rivals, and the relationship between Dave and Amy was still quite good. The children together brought them closer, and Cari Lea clearly hindered their reunion. The police quickly questioned Amy, but surprisingly, Amy had an alibi. She was not at Liz's house when the shooting occurred, and this was confirmed by several people. Because there was no hard evidence, Amy was not arrested. Experts processed the data from Liz's cell phone and discovered important information. Anthony discovered fake email addresses with different variations of the name Cari Lea. In addition, Anthony found an application that Cari Lea used to schedule messages to be sent at certain times. This could explain why Liz and Dave received messages from Cari Lea at the same time. Anthony began to suspect Liz Golyar. The answer became clear when Liz's fingerprints were compared to those found on the steering wheel of Cari Lea's car, and they matched perfectly. The culprit was revealed. The killer has been here for years without anyone knowing. The case needs to be solved as soon as possible. The police want to catch Liz red-handed, so they plan to frame Liz. The police decide to make up a story about believing Liz, with Amy still being the main suspect. Liz takes the bait. Liz is extremely happy because she can finally get rid of another rival who is hindering Liz's happiness with Dave. Soon after, Liz gives the police an email that she says is from Amy. In the email, Amy admits to kidnapping Cari Lea and includes many details about the incident. The confession in the email states that Cari Lea was stabbed in the stomach or chest before being dumped. In addition, the email contains information about Cari Lea's car and home address that no one else knows. The police say that Liz has provided information that only the real culprit would know. The email messages clearly indicated that the crime had taken place in a car, so the police decided to re-examine Cari Lea's car. After the police removed the upholstery and fabric, they discovered blood stains belonging to Cari Lea, who had gone missing. Liz had created fake messages on Cari Lea's behalf without raising suspicion. According to the investigation, Liz Golyar dated both Dave and a man named Garrett. Garrett lived at the IP address identified as the source of the messages under Cari Lea's name. When talking to Garrett, the police discovered that he had been in a long-term relationship with Shawnana Golyar, known to many as Liz. Garrett had invited Liz to live with his children after a fire. However, their relationship became complicated and strained when they lived together, with Garrett having to care for Liz's children while she was away. Garrett was surprised to hear from police that Liz had spent 40 to 50 hours a week impersonating the missing woman Cari Lea. Liz's room was a mess, but no significant evidence was found. However, police did find several cell phones and electronic devices in the last room she stayed in. In late December 2016, Shawnana Golyar, known as Liz, was charged with first-degree murder. Liz's attorney, James Martin Davis, hopes the case will fail because Cari Lea's body has not been found, the murder weapon has not been found, and Liz has not pleaded guilty. There is no evidence to prove that Cari Lea is dead. The defense team decides to hold a new trial, with Liz's guilt decided by a judge. Electronic evidence was presented along with physical evidence. The prosecution asserted that the amount of blood found on the passenger seat of Cari Lea's car was consistent with Liz's confession. Police analyzed the memory card that Liz had been using when Cari Lea went missing. The memory card was on Dave's tablet. Police recovered deleted images, including a photo of a human foot with a Chinese symbol tattoo. The foot belonged to a man who had died many years earlier. There was also a tattoo that Cari Lea's mother identified as Cari Lea. The photo was used to confirm Liz's guilt. The judge found Shawnana Golyar, also known as Liz, guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to life in prison without parole. Additionally, Liz was convicted of arson in August 2013, a fire that not only destroyed her home but also killed her pet. Liz was sentenced to an additional 20 years in prison. She is currently incarcerated at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women and maintains her innocence. Cari Lea's son Maxwell has followed in his mother's footsteps by becoming a computer programmer. Maxwell graduated from the University of Iowa with a degree in software engineering and data science and is married. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Brett Ryan. Brett Ryan grew up in Canada, in a large family with his parents, Bill and Susan. Bill works at the Toronto Star daily newspaper and spends time on his many interests, including sports, yoga, and psychology, which help balance family life. In addition, his wife, Susan, is able to manage the household, take care of the children, and keep their Toronto home clean. Passers-by often stop to admire the family's beautiful and blooming garden. Although Susan loved her sons equally, but Brett seemed to be less criticized because he was generally well-behaved. Brett was very clever at getting out of difficult situations, which gave the impression that he was a good boy, although this was not always the case. Brett was extremely popular in school, with everyone wanting to be his friend or at least be able to greet him by name, just like his older brothers. After high school, Brett attended university, driven by a desire to surpass his brother's achievements. To earn extra money, he placed an ad in the local newspaper, offering to paint houses and fences for Toronto residents. At first, his business was quite successful and Brett felt proud, especially with his first income. His mother, Susan, was thrilled and often cited him as a role model for others. However, things took a turn when Brett dropped out of college to focus full-time on his paint business. Without a degree, he had to work full-time as a paint salesman, which deprived him of formal education and exposed him to paint fumes on a regular basis. For a while, Brett felt confident and superior to his brothers, but this soon changed. After a couple of years, his brothers, Christopher and Leland, graduated and landed jobs in their specialized fields. Christopher worked for the Toronto Transit Commission, and Leland became the family artist and designer. As they established their careers and moved out of their parents' home, Brett's power began to diminish significantly. To save money on rent, Brett continued to live with his parents and younger brother, who attended a school for gifted children. Brett's financial situation grew more dire over time. By 2007, when he turned 26, his debt had surged to more than $60,000. This burden led to depression, but despite his inner turmoil, Brett maintained a cheerful exterior, always willing to lend a helping hand and participate in volunteer work. His friends and acquaintances were unaware of the immense emotional pain he was hiding. Brett faced a severe situation on October 28, 2007. With winter approaching, he he had no orders. Left with no other choice, Brett wore his oldest clothes, including a hat, a long sweater his brother had given him and a long scarf his mother had knitted. It was the first time he had worn the scarf, but it was finally coming in handy. He wrapped it around his face, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes, and headed for the bank that was on the outskirts of his neighborhood. Brett stood in line at the bank, holding a thick folder and favoring his right foot as he waited his turn. When the bank employee called him forward, he approached her and spoke in a hushed tone. He calmly informed her that he had a gun and urged her to remove all the cash from the register and hand it over to him. He warned her that if she didn't comply, he would start shooting, and she would be the first person he would harm. She, with trembling hands, handed him all the cash from the register. Brett quietly exited the building, careful not to draw the attention of the guardians. Once outside, Brett took off running. He counted the money he had stolen from the bank, but it wasn't much, just over $1,000. To pay off his debt, he calculated that he would need to rob about 60 more banks, a crazy idea, but to him it seemed like the only option. For the first few days, Brett was fearful that the police would somehow catch up with him, so he avoided going home. He told his mother he had a job in a neighboring town and spent his nights sleeping in his car. Periodically, Brett would sneak back to his house to check if there were any police cars staking out the area. Finding none, he felt reassured that he was in the clear. The first robbery was followed by a second, then a third, and a fourth. Each time, Brett changed his clothes, opting for second-hand or discarded items he found in the trash. He would burn the used clothes after each crime. Brett also bought a beard from a costume party store to further disguise himself. Brett committed a string of bank robberies in the Toronto area, and his distinctive beard made a lasting impression on the witnesses. His total intended theft across all instances never exceeded $3,000. Brett's luck ran out when police spotted his car on surveillance cameras and followed him home. They tracked his exact route, gathering details from various vehicles to prove his guilt. Further inquiries yielded little new information, so the authorities closely tracked a particular road in an attempt to shed light on the case. Their patience and hard work finally paid off. They found a potential lead. This person of interest, a bearded man, was found walking alone near a bank and was promptly detained by the officer for further investigation. Brett was under investigation for 7 months before being charged with robbery with a firearm, despite having a gun permit. Notably, he never actually carried a gun or any other weapon during the robberies. He didn't even bring a kitchen knife. Initially, he was charged with 19 counts, but after multiple appeals filed by him and his family, only 8 of those counts were upheld. Upon being given the opportunity to apply for parole, Brett submitted a petition. In it, he asked the authorities to consider the circumstances that led him to commit the crimes, including severe depression caused by 2 failed relationships and a significant amount of debt. He also reiterated that he had never intended to harm anyone during the robberies, as evidenced by his lack of weapons. His remarks were taken into account, but as a condition of his potential parole, he was required to undergo a session with a psychologist. The sessions had a positive impact on Brett. During his time in prison, he had lost touch with his family, but he took the initiative to reconnect with them. The positive changes in Brett were noticed by the commissioners, and on November 24, 2010, he was released from prison. However, the freedom he had fought so hard for turned out to be more challenging than he had anticipated. Prior to his career as a painter, Brett struggled with deep emotional pain that weighed heavily on him. He had previously been a bank robber and served time in prison, which damaged his reputation. As a result, no company would hire him, and even those who initially hired him for house painting services would cancel once they discovered his true identity. The neighbors, who once admired Susan's garden and visited frequently, now spread unpleasant rumors about the family. The Brett family quickly sold their house and relocated to Scarborough. Susan started a new garden, and Brett found a job with a trading company. Although the pay was low, his parents helped him financially to rebuild his life and continue his university education. Brett continued to see a psychologist, who consistently advised him to maintain a strong connection with his family. Brett's life took a turn for the better when he met Kristen Baxter in September 2011. Kristen was an amazing person who had her own apartment with a stunning sea view. She was also into sports, which helped her stay in shape. What Brett appreciated most about her was that she didn't care about his past. They enjoyed traveling together, including a trip to Australia. Brett's parents were thrilled to see their son in a happy relationship and were confident that Kristen would encourage him to reach his full potential. However, just when everything was going well, tragedy struck. Brett's father passed away, leaving him in shock and sending him into a depressive state. As a result, Brett started visiting his psychologist more frequently to cope with his emotions. Brett was juggling two responsibilities, supporting his mother financially and nurturing his relationship with Kristen. They were both young adults, eager to build a stronger and more significant relationship with each other. Brett fell deeply in love with Kristen and decided to carry out an important plan. He had some savings and, after discussing his plans with his mother, decided to propose to Kristen with a ring. His mother supported his decision and gave him money to buy a ring. Although Kristen didn't need an expensive gift, Brett chose a gold ring with a large diamond to make the proposal special. Kristen happily accepted his proposal. As they began planning their wedding, Brett agreed with Kristen's decisions, but he was worried about the high costs and how they would affect his job. Brett found a job opening at a large technology company on the internet and applied for it. He updated his resume and submitted it, and was even invited for an interview, which he successfully passed. As a result, he was offered the job and was thrilled. He eagerly shared the news with his fiancée and mother, and asked them for money to buy an expensive suit for work. His mother agreed to help him, and he purchased the suit. However, just as Brett was about to start his new job, the company called him to inform him that they had to withdraw their offer. The security department had discovered his past criminal record, and the company could no longer hire him. This news was devastating for Brett, and his mood plummeted. He felt like giving up on his job search and education, wondering why he was wasting his time applying for jobs that he would never get due to his past mistakes. He decided that it would be better to use the money his mother and brothers had given him for something else. Brett had dropped out of university, but he didn't tell his family or his counselor. To maintain the illusion of success, Brett would wear a suit and tie, then change into casual clothes on the way to his job as a house painter. He would tell his relatives that he worked in an office. To further deceive his loved ones, Brett would post fake photos on social media, pretending to be at work or attending business events. He would also fake phone calls, making it seem like he was busy with work-related issues. Brett's family had no idea that he was hiding the truth about his life. As Brett's wedding to Kristen approached in September 2016, his deception reached new heights. He rented an expensive restaurant for the reception, which cost $100 per guest. His family was thrilled, believing that Brett had finally turned his life around with a prestigious job and a beautiful fiancée. However, Brett's deceptions became so overwhelming that he could no longer control his lies. Brett's wedding was just a month away, and he was struggling to cover the costs. He had been borrowing money from his mother, but when she could no longer help him, he pressured her to find a higher-paying job. Meanwhile, he was planning a bachelor party and had invited all his friends and brothers. Brett had a secret. He had been lying to his family for a year about working as an engineer for a technology company. When he finally confessed to his counselor, the counselor advised him to come clean to his mother. After much procrastination, Brett told his mother the truth, which devastated her. She bragged to everyone about her son's success. Brett's mother demanded that he tell his fiancée, Kristen, the truth, threatening to do so herself if he didn't. She also warned him that his brothers were aware of the situation and were on her side. However, Brett couldn't bring himself to confess to Kristen, despite knowing that the wedding was unlikely to happen due to his deception. With less than a month to go before the wedding, Brett remained silent, knowing that Kristen deserved to know the truth before it was too late. Brett was anxious about his mother revealing a potentially scandalous secret to his fiancée, Kristen. Every time her phone rang, he would tense up, holding his breath until he realized it wasn't his mother on the line, but rather one of Kristen's friends inquiring about her wedding plans. Eventually, Brett came up with a plan to silence his mother for good. As a convicted felon, Brett was prohibited from owning firearms. He decided to use a crossbow, a silent and deadly weapon, to carry out his plan. Interestingly, his late father had taught him how to shoot a crossbow at targets in their garden, a hobby that Brett had excelled at. Brett purchased the crossbow and arrows at a local sporting goods store and hid them in his garage, disguising them among construction debris. He also created a fake alibi by rigging his computer to automatically post pre-written comments on YouTube. He achieved this by attaching a spoon to a fan, which was connected to his computer. The fan was set to a timer, making it seem like Brett was actively using his computer at the time of the crime. Brett made everyone believe that he spent the whole day at home, watching videos and commenting on them. However, on the morning of August 25th, he had other plans. He put on disguising clothes that concealed his face, sneaked out of the house through the back door to avoid the security cameras, and took a train to his parents' house. He wants to eliminate anyone who might stand in the way of the peaceful life he and Kristen are building. When Brett arrived at his parents' house, his mother, Susan, was taken aback by his unexpected visit. She wasn't feeling well that day, but Brett persisted in persuading her not to reveal his plans to his future wife. Despite her poor health, Susan firmly refused to comply with Brett's demands. As he continued to pressure her, Brett's anger escalated, and Susan sensed that something was terribly wrong. She noticed the crazed look in her son's eyes and warned him that she had already called for help and that Christopher was on his way. Brett's anger reached a boiling point. He rushed to the garage, grabbed a crossbow, but his rage and adrenaline surge made him unable to aim properly. Instead, he used the crossbow's butt to bludgeon his mother. To ensure she was dead, he tightened a rope around her neck. After covering her body with plastic bags, Brett loaded the crossbow with arrows, ready to face whoever was coming next. Brett's brother Christopher was lured into a trap by the suspect. As he entered the garage or the yard, Brett, who was hiding in the bushes, ambushed and shot Christopher in the neck. Christopher died shortly after the attack. Alexander, the youngest brother, was the next target. The suspect had also managed to lure him, but Alexander's outcome was different. Shot in the neck with an arrow, Alexander was critically injured but didn't die instantly. He screamed and cried for help as the attack took place. Throughout this violence, Leland remained asleep on the second floor, oblivious to the crime happening nearby and to the identity of the perpetrator, who was also a family member. It was Alexander's screams that startled Leland out of sleep, ran downstairs, and stumbled upon the horrific scene of his brother Brett trying to strangle Alexander. A fight broke out between Leland and Brett, and Leland ended up in control, forcing Brett to back down. Leland immediately fled to a neighbor's house and called the police. With no means of escape, Brett remained in the house, realizing too late that his actions had disastrous consequences. In a desperate attempt to make amends, he composed a text message to Kristen, pleading for her forgiveness. Upon arriving at the scene, police officers found Brett, covered in blood, sitting beside his critically injured brother Alexander, who would later succumb to his injuries in the hospital. Brett voluntarily surrendered to the authorities, requesting to be handcuffed and taken into custody. During his confession, he revealed the location of his mother's body, hidden beneath packages in the garage, and acknowledged that she was beyond help. Brett admitted at the police station during the trial that he had not intended to kill Susan, but rather to scare her. In contrast, he had planned to kill Christopher and Alexander, who were witnesses to the crime. If they had not been present, they would still be alive. Brett attempted to justify his actions by citing his struggles with depression, but this did not lead to a more lenient sentence. Despite Brett's cooperation with the investigation and his voluntary confession, the judge imposed 3 life sentences, 1 for each murder. Brett will be eligible for parole in 2041. Leland, the sole survivor of the incident, has refused to speak to reporters, but he is well known in Toronto as the one who narrowly escaped the carnage. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Savannah Greywind. Savannah Greywind was born on August 9, 1995, in Burke County, North Dakota, to a family with a mix of cultural backgrounds. Her father is of European American descent, while her mother is a member of the Spirit Lake Sioux Indian tribe. Savannah had 2 brothers, Joy and Casey, and a younger sister, Kayla. Her parents, Norberta and Joe, were proud of their children. The family lived in Fargo, North Dakota, until Savannah was 9 years old. Then in 2005 they moved to Spirit Lake Reservation. Savannah loves nature and animals, especially horses. It was on the reservation that she met her partner, Ashton Matheny, when she was 15 years old. They remained together as they grew older. When it was time for college, the family moved back to Fargo. Savannah found work caring for the elderly at a nursing home. She studied to become a nurse and is preparing to take her exams in September. She was expecting her first child and was excited to start her life with Ashton. They had found an apartment and planned to move in together in early September. However, at the time of her pregnancy, Savannah was staying with her parents on the bottom floor of a 7-unit, 3-story apartment building. The building was also home to Brooke Cruz, a 38-year-old woman, and her partner, William Hone, who rented an apartment on the 3rd floor. Brooke's life was deeply affected by a past marked by hardship and complexity. The experiences turned her into a dark and emotionally disturbed person. Brooke had trouble managing her emotions and behaviors, often feeling anxious and angry. Brooke's fascination with mysticism and true crime stories began at a young age. As an adult, she studied the psychology of serial killers and attempted to understand their thought processes. Her writing reflected an obsession with human nature's darker side. Brooke saw 2 conflicting forces within people, good and bad, but her own life was a testament to the destructive power of unchecked darkness. By the time Brooke was 38, struggling with depression, physical illness, and exhaustion from toxic relationships that included regular physical abuse. Her fear of losing William was exacerbated by her inability to get pregnant. This desperate situation drove Brooke to think about committing a shocking crime, taking the life of a pregnant woman to take the baby for herself. After Brooke's arrest, investigators found a disturbing collection of books and notes in her apartment. The books covered topics such as forensic psychology, obstetrics, and law. Her notes listed items for a birthing kit, including scissors, blades, clamps, gloves, and an infant CPR bag. Brooke also had a stash of oxytocin, a hormone used to induce labor. Brooke grew up in a large family in Bradenton, Florida. Her parents divorced when she was young, leaving her mother to care for 7 children, including Brooke. While her family appeared to be well off, Brooke's diary revealed a difficult childhood that she tried to forget. As she entered her teenage years, Brooke became increasingly troubled and was the only one of her siblings to move in with her father, a man her mother described as a professional criminal. After a difficult period living with her father, Brooke was passed around through various foster families, causing her to lose contact with her siblings. Years later, they would only find out that Brooke had become the mother of 7 children. In 1995, when she was 15 years old, she met Aaron Edwards. 2 years later, she gave birth to her first child in Florida but chose to leave the baby with the father and relocate. Despite a court order to pay child support, Brooke failed to meet her obligations. She would eventually reconnect with her daughter briefly on Facebook when the child turned 14. Brooke worked multiple jobs, including as a waitress at the Chinese Dragon restaurant, a sales representative, and an animal specialist at Petland in Florida. However, her life was further marked by brushes with the law. In 2002, the 23-year-old was jailed in Missouri for document falsification but was paroled on August 31, 2022. Unfortunately, her freedom was short-lived, as she was rearrested and jailed in Texas for violating her parole. By the time Brooke was 27, she married Carl Cruz, a carpenter from Minnesota, in 2006. She gave birth to 2 children and worked as an administrative assistant at her husband's carpentry shop. However, Brooke had an affair, which ultimately led to their divorce in June 2009. Carl Cruz gained custody of their children, and Brooke moved to California without explanation. The only thing she did carefully and diligently throughout her life was to keep diaries, meticulously recording events as they unfolded. After a terrible crime has occurred, the diary was published in the press. The diary told of a string of lovers, home births, and abortions. At first, many of these relationships seem healthy and loving. However, over time, the men in her life begin to control her by making her feel inferior. Brooke felt that Carl Cruz bullied and humiliated her, making her feel like a bad and promiscuous mother. Despite these negative feelings, after moving to California and filing for divorce, Brooke surprisingly returned to Carl Cruz's house. She then registered on a dating website and started taking psychology classes seriously. Brooke met Andrew Murray, a chef from Katoomba, New South Wales, Australia, on the dating site Tagged. Brooke decided to move to Australia to be with Andrew. However, before leaving, she was involved in a dispute with Carl Cruz over child custody in January 2012. During the argument, she grabbed a knife and attacked Carl Cruz. The police arrested her and charged her. Although she denied the allegations, she chose not to wait for her court hearing and instead fled to Australia using false immigration documents. Once there, she married Andrew. Andrew's marriage to Brooke lasted only 6 months. During that time, he discovered her past, including a previous husband and children in the U.S., as well as fake immigration papers. According to Andrew, Brooke threatened him for helping her, prompting him to report everything to the police as a precautionary measure. Andrew remembers their marriage as a time when Brooke became intensely interested in crime and the behaviors of serial killers. Brooke's interest in crime began as early as 2012, when she was studying psychology in nursing. Her thesis focused on serial killers, and she spent a lot of time reading about them. In total, Brooke spent 6 months and 10 days in Australia before returning to the U.S. in October 2012. However, after returning to the U.S., she became embroiled in a lengthy custody battle for her 2 children. Reconciling with Andrew might have given her a chance to start over, but instead, she met William Hone, a 28-year-old man with a history of child abuse, in late 2012. Brooke fell in love with William, a man who had been divorced twice. Despite his troubled past, Brooke was optimistic about her new life. She took a job and began to rediscover herself. In 2013, Brooke decided to pursue a degree at Minnesota State University, enrolling in courses such as social behavior, psychology of deviant behavior, and research methods. She was particularly drawn to the psychology of serial killers, and her paper on the subject earned her top marks. Brooke's relationship with William was loving and kind at first, creating a peaceful home for their children. However, over time, the relationship became codependent, marked by joint substance abuse, and the problem is getting more and more tense. As Brooke's relationship deteriorated, her well-being suffered. She began to withdraw from her children, struggled in her job, and became increasingly fixated on her research into the darker aspects of human psychology. In 2014, Brooke's life and spirit changed dramatically after a series of terrible things happened to her. The specifics of these things are not disclosed, but they appear to have had a profound and lasting impact on her mental health. Brooke suffered a panic attack and was rushed to the hospital, where she was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. In the following year, Brooke's relationship with William began to deteriorate. She expressed her feelings of emptiness in her diary. She felt neglected, which led to her starting to isolate herself from others. Brooke's physical and mental health continued to decline, and she was eventually diagnosed with a gallbladder disease. This led to a significant decline in her overall well-being, causing her to become reclusive and rarely leave her house. The situation took a turn for the worse when Brooke's partner, William, became violent. In May 2016, the police responded to a call and found that William had brutally beaten Brooke in the bathroom. He pleaded guilty to assault and was banned from approaching her. However, he failed to comply with the restraining order and was found in Brooke's apartment 6 months later. The relationship between Brooke and William continued, but it was no longer healthy. However, one issue remained: William wanted a child, while Brooke was unable to have one due to a 2011 abortion. In 2017, after a fight, Brooke fabricated a pregnancy to prevent William from leaving her. To convince him, she sent him fake proof, including a false ultrasound picture and a photo of a positive pregnancy test. Brooke found an online recording of a random baby's heartbeat and presented it to William, claiming it was the heartbeat of the child she carrying. In reality, there was no pregnancy. William had already shared with friends and family that Brooke was pregnant, and in an attempt to save face, he pressured her to actually have the baby. Brooke understood William's statement as a final decision and thought he was insisting that they adopt a child from someone else, specifically their pregnant neighbor Savannah, who lived 3 floors below them. Brooke, who had medical knowledge, began making a list of what she needed to induce labor. One Saturday afternoon in August, Brooke deceived Savannah by offering her $20 to model a dress, claiming it was one she was currently sewing. Savannah agrees and goes to Brooke's apartment, unaware of Brooke's true intentions. Meanwhile, Savannah had ordered a pizza, expecting to eat it when she returned home. Savannah did not return home at the expected time. The brother went upstairs to the apartment Brooke's around 2:30 p.m. and heard the sound of a sewing machine, but no one answered the door. A short while later, Savannah's father, Joe, also went upstairs and knocked on the door. Brooke, who was with Savannah, yelled out that they were still working on a dress and that Savannah was trying it on, which is why they couldn't open the door. When Norberta returned home, she found that the pizza was untouched. She texted her daughter several times but received no response. She then went upstairs to the apartment, where a neighbor informed her that Savannah had left a while ago after finishing her dress fitting. Norberta became anxious and searched her apartment. Finding that Savannah's shoes, purse, car keys, and other belongings were still there. Savannah had been experiencing heat and swelling that made it painful and difficult for her to walk, so it was unlikely that she had gone for a walk. Norberta called Ashton Matheny, hoping that he might have picked up Savannah, but he replied that he hadn't heard from her either. Growing increasingly worried, Norberta called the police and began driving around the neighborhood, searching for her pregnant daughter. Norberta was driving and thought that if Savannah had gone out, Norberta would have found her nearby. Later that day, the police searched Brooke and William's apartment because it was the last place Savannah was seen. They allowed the police to enter and didn't interfere, but since the police didn't have a warrant, they didn't check inside closets or behind closed doors. The police informed Savannah's family that since she was considered an adult, she had the right to make her own choices. They also stated that without evidence of a crime, there was no requirement for them to keep the family updated on her situation. The investigators concluded that Savannah had left voluntarily. However, Savannah's family was upset by the police department's apparent indifference to her disappearance. The police searched the apartment 2 more times but found nothing. Later, William would admit that he hid Savannah infant in a suitcase and Savannah's body in a dresser with the shells removed. 2 days after Savannah's murder, William and Brooke drove to a bridge over the Red River, carrying the dresser with Savannah's body, and dumped it into the water. On August 23, 2017, William's co-workers reported to police that he had mentioned having a baby at home. Around the same time, residents of the apartment building where Williams lived hearing a baby crying from apartment number 5, prompting them to notify the police. With this new information, officers obtained a warrant and conducted a thorough search of the apartment, where they found a live newborn baby girl. Brooke later revealed that Savannah had given her the baby. According to Brooke, Savannah had given birth to the baby just 2 days after she went missing. Savannah had confided in Brooke that she didn't want the baby and had asked for Brooke help in inducing labor. 2 days later, at 3 a.m., Savannah arrived at Brooke's home with the baby in her arms and handed the infant over to her. After Savannah was reported missing, the police took her baby into temporary custody. A few days later, a DNA test confirmed the baby's parentage, and Savannah's daughter was reunited with her father for 3 more days. The police and hundreds of local residents conducted a thorough search of the area. The police asked residents to carefully check their properties, including vacant apartments, dumpsters, and any other hiding for evidence. At a press conference on August 27, the police chief urged the public to help find Savannah. However, just a day later, a fisherman found her body wrapped in plastic on the Red River near Harwood. Savannah was identified by a tattoo on her leg. The police charged Brooke Cruz and William Holm with conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to kidnap, and providing false information. They admitted to the incident, with Brooke explaining that she initiated the fight by accusing Savannah of taking her cat without permission and mistreating it. The argument turned physical, and Brooke pushed Savannah, who fell and hit her head on the bathroom sink, losing consciousness. Brooke used a knife to remove the baby from Savannah, making a cut from hip to hip. As she did this, Savannah went consciousness. When questioned, Brooke confirmed that William was not aware of the plan beforehand. According to Brooke, William came home, entered the bathroom, and saw Savannah. He asked if Savannah was alive, and Brooke replied that she didn't know. William then left the bathroom briefly, returning in his underwear with a rope. He used the rope to strangle Savannah. After the murder, Brooke and William cleaned the floor and walls, then stuffed Savannah's body into a bathroom closet. When the police arrived, Brooke attempted to remain calm. The officers searched the apartment, but their search was superficial due to the lack of a search warrant. As a result, they did not look in closets or dressers. According to Brooke, the child was under a blanket on the bed next to William during the searches. The child was calm and did not cry, so the child was not discovered. By the time of the third inspection on August 20th, Savannah's body had been moved to a dresser, and the infant was hidden in a suitcase. On August 21st, Brooke and William disposed of a dresser by taking it down the stairs, loading it into their Jeep Cherokee, and driving it to the river. William denied participating in the crime, but admitted to hiding a newborn baby girl and providing false information to police to cover up the crime. Both Brooke and William were set a bail of $2 million, which William thought was an unrealistic amount. Brooke was later sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although William's participation in the crime was not proven during the trial, he was found guilty of kidnapping and sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty. A cellmate of Brooks, Jennifer Robinson, testified against Brooke, claiming that Brooke had confessed to strangling Savannah with a rope after discovering Savannah's affair with William. In May 2019, William was sent to prison. On October 7, 2019, he appealed to the Supreme Court. After a review of his sentence, Judge Olin, who had originally given William a life sentence, decided to give him the longest possible sentence allowed at the time, which was 20 years in prison. Since William had already spent 775 days in prison, he would have to serve more than 7 additional years. Savannah's baby, Hasley, is now 6 years old and attending kindergarten. The Savannah's parents regularly post updates on their public Facebook page about their granddaughter's life. The case has received significant attention, and Norberta believes that her daughter's disappearance was not taken seriously because Savannah was Native American. She thinks that if Savannah were white, her disappearance would have been treated more seriously. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case, the case of Luz Maria Lopez. Luz Maria Lopez was born on March 17, 1995, in San Cristobal, Verapaz, a small town, to a modest family. She was the youngest of 2 children. Her parents, Al Morales and Brian, raised her along with her older brother, Omar. Luz Maria's early life was marked by a serious health scare. As an infant, she nearly died due to an intestinal obstruction and underwent a complex surgery. Although her doctors were uncertain about her chances of recovery, her mother's prayers and faith played a significant role in Luz Maria's survival. Fortunately, the surgery did not affect Luz Maria's development. She grew up to be a healthy and active child. During her school years, Luz Maria was a sporty. She was actively involved in gymnastics, athletics, and classical dance. She easily makes friends with everyone and got along with people from different backgrounds. Luz Maria excelled academically, particularly in the humanities. After completing her secondary education, Luz Maria decided to pursue higher education at a prestigious state university. She chose to study law and later specialized in criminalistics, a field that had always fascinated her. A fateful encounter took place when Luz Maria accompanied her mother to a car dealership in Coban, the capital of Alta Verapaz. The occasion was her older brother's 25th birthday, and the family wanted to surprise him with a motorcycle he had always desired. Inside the dealership, they were warmly greeted by a courteous and attentive young sales consultant named Jorge, who showcased the available models, offering some advice. Although Luz Maria and her mother have already chosen a model, but they want to consider and discuss it with her father before making a decision to buy it. As they left, they took a business card from the dealership and Luz Maria left her phone number for further communication. Shortly after, she received a call from Jorge himself, but instead of discussing the potential purchase, the conversation turned to a more personal subject. Over the following days, Jorge contacted Luz Maria several times, gradually building up the courage to invite her to meet at a coffee shop. Jorge was clearly smitten with Luz Maria, the beautiful, sultry brunette, but he didn't know how to approach her. Luckily, Luz Maria also liked Jorge, and when he asked to meet, she happily agreed. Although Luz Maria was a year younger, their small age difference wasn't an issue. They fell deeply in love, both believing it was love at first sight and that a long, happy life was ahead. A few short months into their relationship, they decided to live together, despite parental objections. They had a small, private wedding, attended only by close friends and family. However, their special day almost got derailed due to a mishap at the banquet venue. They had to cough up extra cash to save the celebration, which wedding ultimately took place on schedule. Jorge was born in 1996 in Santa Catalina Latina, a town in central Guatemala. Jorge and his younger brother, Pablo, grew up in a low-income household. His family struggled financially, so as children, they did not have the luxury of fine clothes and expensive toys, as the family's limited income only covered the most basic needs. Even though Jorge grew up in difficult circumstances, he seemed to have no motivation to change his life for the better. He lived life at his own pace, choosing to enjoy simple pleasures rather than strive for advanced degrees or job security. Those who knew Jorge described him as introverted, unsociable, and having few close relationships, especially with women. When he met the love of his life, Luz Maria, he went all out to win her heart and quickly proposed, fearing she might change her mind. However, Luz Maria's parents, Morales and Brian, were suspicious of him from the start. They couldn't quite put their finger on what it was about him that they didn't like, but they couldn't convince their daughter to call off the wedding. The marriage turned out to be unhappy. After the wedding, Luz Maria became pregnant, but she had not yet finished her university degree and struggled to find a good job. Due to her lack of experience and health issues, she had to accept short-term, low-skilled jobs. Meanwhile, her husband lost his job and was in no hurry to find a new one. When their daughter, Alice, was born, the family's financial situation became more difficult. Both spouses were unemployed, and they had no money to pay rent, buy food, or pay for the family's basic needs. Jorge convinced Luz Maria that their only option was to temporarily move in with his parents. Luz Maria was initially hesitant, but facing no alternative and having a baby to care for, she eventually gave her consent. Luz Maria's mother was aware of the problems her daughter was facing in her marriage, but despite mother concerns, Luz Maria was optimistic that things would improve. Luz Maria assured her mother that everything would get better soon, so her mother decided to visit her and see how she was doing. However, when she went to Luz Maria's husband's house to see her daughter, she was shocked by what she found. Luz Maria was in a terrible state, eating only once a day and very little at that. This was partly due to Jorge's family not providing her with enough food, even though she was unemployed and breastfeeding her young daughter. The lack of food was only one of many problems Luz Maria faced in her in-laws' home. She was constantly belittled and even physically abused by her husband's younger brother. He was annoyed by the sound of the baby crying and the presence of children's belongings in the house. On several occasions, he threw items at Luz Maria, including a baby bottle that hit her and her daughter, Alice, who was in her arms. Despite witnessing these events, Jorge just stood by and did nothing to protect his wife and children, he treating them as if they were strangers. Morales convinces her daughter to take her granddaughter to her maternal home. Jorge arrived shortly afterwards, asking his wife to return home and promising to find a job. Luz Maria agreed, on the condition that they could rent their own apartment and live separately from Jorge's parents. After completing her education and defending her diploma, Luz Maria landed her dream job at the city prosecutor's office. As a smart, talented, and responsible young woman, she quickly earned the respect of her colleagues and began to advance in her career. As time passed, the family's financial situation significantly improved, thanks to Luz Maria's hard work and success. They were eventually able to afford a car. Meanwhile, Jorge continued to struggle with his own life, failing to find direction and instead relying on his wife's income. His laziness and jealousy intensified over time, causing tension in the household. Jorge had a volatile temper, and the situation worsened with time. Jorge was a man who preferred a life of leisure, spending most of his time at home watching TV, drinking beer with friends, and relying on his wife's income. He was extremely possessive and controlling, restricting his wife's freedom and autonomy. He wouldn't allow her to make friends, have lunch with colleagues, or even be alone without him. He constantly monitored her phone activity, checked her call history, and read her messages. He also forbade her from creating social media accounts. When they were alone at home, Jorge's behavior was just as bad. He frequently arguments, blamed his wife for all their problems, and never took responsibility for his actions. When they lived with his parents, Jorge failed to stand up for his wife, instead watching as she was humiliated, insulted, and even physically abused by his relatives. Jorge frequently resorted to physical violence in their relationship. He had a controlling attitude towards his wife, Luz Maria, and wrongly believed she would accept his abusive treatment. Their neighbors frequently heard screams coming from their house and witnessed signs of physical abuse on Luz Maria's face and body. Luz Maria had tried to leave her husband multiple times, taking their daughter and moving in with her parents. However, her husband would always show up, beg for forgiveness on his knees, and promise to change. Despite her parents' warnings to leave him, Luz Maria would forgive her husband and give him another chance. On December 15, 2020, after another violent argument, Luz Maria took their 3-year-old daughter, Alice, fled to her mother's house in tears. The next day, Jorge arrived, but it was unclear whether he was seeking reconciliation with his wife or just wanted his car back. He claimed to have found a new job and promised that their lives would improve, swearing that he would never physically harm Luz Maria again. Luz Maria believed him once more and returned to their rented apartment with her husband. In January 2021, Jorge failed to get a job as promised and stole the money Luz Maria had earned, leaving their family with nothing. Luz Maria called her mother to complain, and her mother agreed to meet with her to give her some money until she received her next salary. However, on January 19th, Luz Maria failed to show up and was unreachable by phone, which was unusual for her. Concerned for her daughter's well-being, Morales went to Luz Maria's workplace the next day and found that she had not shown up for 2 consecutive days and had not been in contact with anyone. Around the same time, Jorge was also looking for Luz Maria. He went to the prosecutor's office claiming they had a fight and assuming she had gone to her mother's house. However, Morales suspected that he was lying and immediately went to the police to report Luz Maria missing. That same day, a nationwide alert system was launched under the codename Isabel Claudina. This system was originally designed to facilitate urgent searches for missing young women. When the massive search began, her husband, Jorge, was immediately identified as the lead suspect. In fact, he was the only suspect. Luz Maria had no enemies, and there was no reason to believe she had been kidnapped. The last person to see her alive was Jorge himself. Jorge denied any involvement in Luz Maria's disappearance, claiming he had been searching for her and was outraged to be considered a suspect. Jorge's story had several holes in it, and he couldn't give a clear reason for not telling the police about his wife's disappearance on the same day it happened. If Jorge thought Luz Maria was at her mother's house, it wasn't clear why he didn't call or visit her there. On January 22nd, municipal workers stumbled upon the body of Luz Maria Lopez while responding to a clogged storm drain near the road. When they lifted the grate, they found the large plastic bag containing charred human remains. The workers immediately reported the discovery to the police, suspected that the body might be that of Luz Maria. Forensic experts confirmed that the remains belonged to she, and Luz Maria's parents and brother identified the body despite its severe disfigurement from fire. Notably, the body was found on the same street as the prosecutor's office where Luz Maria worked. Despite the body's severe burns, pathologists determined that Luz Maria had been severely beaten and died from asphyxia. Evidence of internal hemorrhages, fractures sustained while she was still alive, and caked blood in her nose and mouth supported this conclusion. Deep marks on her neck also indicated strangulation. At the time of the discovery of the body, no new suspects had emerged. Luz Maria's parents were convinced that their son-in-law, Jorge, was responsible for the brutal murder of their daughter. As a result, Jorge was immediately taken into custody, and investigators began to look into the motive behind the crime. Experts in psychology and criminal behavior were consulted to examine the relationships within the family and the marriage. During the investigation, Luz Maria's mother, Morales, provided an audio recording that had been sent to her anonymously by a neighbor who had witnessed their frequent arguments. The recording captured a heated argument between they, in which Luz Maria frantically screams and cries for help, accompanied by the faint sounds of a child crying in the background. Morales was deeply shocked and extremely upset by the news. She emphasized that if the witness had immediately contacted the police, her daughter might still be alive. The witness did not call the police or even visit the house where the screams originated. The police were unable to locate the anonymous person, which meant they could not be officially involved in the investigation. During an interview, Morales urged citizens to be vigilant and report instances of domestic violence to the police rather than simply documenting them. She believed that such actions could help save lives. The crime sparked widespread outrage, prompting thousands of people to take to the streets and demand justice for Luz Maria. Jorge was taken into custody, but he continued to deny his involvement, claiming he had driven his wife to work on the day she disappeared. Security footage did show their car heading in the direction of her workplace, but the tinted windows made it impossible to determine how many people were inside. Additionally, no footage showed the car stopping or Luz Maria getting out. At the house they was renting, police discovered evidence of a violent incident. There were faint blood stains and drag marks, suggesting that this was where the brutal attack had occurred. Further evidence was discovered in the trunk of the family car, where microscopic fragments of burnt human flesh were found. The investigators also became interested in a recent purchase made by a double orthopedic mattress. Specifically, they were interested in the dense polyethylene wrapping that came with the mattress. A comparative analysis revealed that Jorge had used this wrapping to package the burnt remains of Luz Maria. Additionally, several neighbors came forward as witnesses, reporting that they had frequently heard Jorge yelling at his wife and threatening to kill her. Just days before Luz Maria's disappearance, Jorge had been overheard shouting that he would kill her if she tried to leave him, and that he would hide her body so well that no one would ever find it. Criminologists used collected data and witness testimony to reconstruct the events surrounding the crime. On the night of January 19, 2021, a brutal murder took place. The day before, Luz Maria and her husband, Jorge, had a violent argument. Jorge physically assaulted her. On this occasion, his rage escalated, causing him to strike his wife multiple times. Her screams for help were heard by the neighbors, but they failed to report the incident to the authorities. The beating left Luz Maria with a broken nose and a head injury. Jorge then strangled her with his bare hands. In an attempt to dispose of the body, he dragged it to the backyard, doused it with flammable liquid, and set it on fire. However, the fire produced a significant amount of smoke and a strong odor, which Jorge feared would attract the attention of the neighbors. He quickly extinguished the flames, wrapped the charred remains in plastic, and sought a secluded location to hide the body, he believing it would never be discovered. Jorge committed a heinous crime in front of his 3.5-year-old daughter, who was old enough to partially understand what was happening. The child witnessed the beating and crime, and her cries and screams were recorded. Despite this, Jorge attempted to cover his tracks by using his knowledge of forensics, gained from his wife's textbooks, to create an alibi. He disposed of her body in a drainage sewer on a poorly lit road with no surveillance cameras. The next morning, Jorge drove to his wife's workplace, pretending to have taken her there as usual. He then began a fake search for her, contacting her colleagues, friends, and family. During the trial, Jorge's lawyers delayed proceedings and attempted to mislead the investigation. They claimed that all the evidence and witness statements were indirect and did not directly prove Jorge's guilt. Defense attorneys requested that Jorge's detention be changed to house arrest, arguing that he was deeply depressed due to the accusations of killing Luz Maria he loved and the mother of his child. However, the crucial evidence came from Luz Maria's phone, which was in Jorge's possession. On the day after the crime, he sent multiple messages from her phone to different people, attempting to make people believe that Luz Maria was still alive. An analysis of the phone's movements revealed that it was consistently in the same locations as Jorge's phone. The defense team attempted to spin this evidence in their favor, claiming that Jorge had found his wife's phone and was driving around the city with it while searching for her. However, they failed to explain why Jorge was sending messages from her phone. Furthermore, bruises and scratches on Jorge's body, which were documented by experts through photographs, suggested that Luz Maria had put up a struggle. The most noticeable injury on Jorge was a scratch on his neck. However, investigators were unable to find Jorge's skin cells under Luz Maria's fingernails. Despite several questionable points in the case, the prosecutor pushed for the maximum possible sentence. The defendant was found guilty of brutally murdering his wife in October 2022. Jorge was sentenced to 50 years in prison, despite maintaining his innocence. Custody of their young daughter, Alice, was awarded to her maternal grandparents. The grandparents expressed that their granddaughter had given their lives new meaning. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michelle Davis. Michelle Ann Cosner Davis was born in Iowa on December 15, 1966. By 2008, at 41 years old, she lived in Des Moines with her 3 kids. Her divorce was nearly finalized and she was eager to start anew. Michelle had already taken steps towards independence, moving into her own apartment and obtaining a restraining order against her husband, Randy Davis. The years leading up to the divorce had been marked by tension and strain within the family. Michelle was a friendly and adventurous person who had a passion for motorcycles. At her job as a secretary for a trucking company, she was well respected and commanded authority. On Thursday, September 11, 2008, Michelle was at work, and her co-workers noticed a significant change in her demeanor after her husband left her. She seemed to have shed a burden that had been weighing her down for years. In a good mood, Michelle wrapped up all her tasks and left the office around 4:30 p.m. After a short time, eyewitnesses started calling 911 to report a serious accident on Interstate 235. They told the operator that a Mercury Sable car had flipped over and a woman was still strapped into the driver's seat with her seatbelt. Tragically, the woman was unconscious, and despite the efforts of the paramedics who arrived at the scene, she could not be saved. The woman who lost her life was identified as Michelle Davis. After arriving at the accident scene, the police initially concluded that Michelle lost control of her vehicle, leading to the crash. However, they reversed this theory just a day later. Forensic experts subsequently determined that Michelle's death was not caused by a head injury sustained during the rollover, but rather by a gunshot wound to the head. The bullet was extracted and sent for analysis, with the hope of tracing the perpetrator. The investigators on this case were dealing with something entirely unprecedented. As they awaited the ballistic examination results, local authorities took proactive measures to safeguard the public. They considered the possibility that Michelle might have been a random target, not premeditated. This raised the alarming prospect of a shooter who wouldn't stop at just one victim. Given the high volume of traffic on the interstate, any driver could potentially become the next target for the unstable perpetrator. It was essential to crack the case quickly, and so the police increased their patrols throughout the city. When detectives realized Michelle's death was not an accident, they revisited the crime scene to try to determine the shooter's whereabouts and if they had left any clues behind. Unfortunately, their efforts yielded nothing. The police failed to recover the cartridge case or any other evidence that could aid the investigation. To make matters worse, the initial assumption that Michelle was a car accident victim led the traffic services to clear the site, which meant that even if there were any evidence, it was likely destroyed and irretrievable by the time the truth came to light. Despite these setbacks, the detectives didn't give up and pinned their hopes on reviewing the traffic camera recordings. These days, CCTV cameras often prove instrumental in helping the police crack cases, and this one was no exception. With the traffic camera recordings at their disposal, the investigators dove right in. First, they needed to locate the recording from the camera nearest the crime scene and rewind it to when the 911 calls started coming in. Half an hour later, the investigators finally found what they were looking for. The video showed Michelle's car upside down, but the footage was poor quality, resembling a slideshow with separate alternating pictures and intervals in between. As a result, the investigators only had a few usable shots, none of which revealed what led to Michelle's car rolling over. This was a disappointing development, as the investigators thought they had finally stumbled upon a crucial clue, only to be left with false hopes. The police still needed to review the remaining camera recordings and search for potential eyewitnesses. Meanwhile, the investigator handling the Michelle Davis case visited her family to break the news that her death was not an accident, as initially thought. This revelation left Michelle's family in shock. Michelle's mother, Patty, had passed away before her. Her father, Michael Lee Cosner, was now grieving the loss of his second daughter. His first daughter, Cheryl Sue Cosner, Michelle's older sister, died in 1965 at just 1 year old. 43 years later, Michael Cosner was facing the unbearable loss of another child. Losing one's children is the ultimate tragedy for any parent. Michelle's family informed the investigator that she had been going through a series of changes in her life, but they did not think she had any financial issues. However, they suspected that the one person who could potentially harm Michelle was her estranged husband, Randy Davis, particularly since their divorce was nearly finalized, and she had obtained a restraining order against him. Meanwhile, another detective interviewed Michelle's colleagues at her workplace and discovered that she was having a close relationship with a coworker named Matt Jorgensen, following her separation from her husband. According to Michelle's friend, the feelings between Michelle and Matt were mutual. Since Michelle was still in the process of divorcing Randy Davis, she and Matt decided to keep their relationship private, only sharing it with a select few colleagues and close friends. The police now had two potential suspects in their investigation, Randy Davis and Matt Jorgensen. However, all attempts to contact Randy were met with failure, as every time they called him, the call went straight to voicemail. On the other hand, the investigators were able to meet with Matt, where they questioned him about his whereabouts on the day Michelle died. Matt was cooperative, openly admitting to having had a romantic relationship with Michelle. He claimed that they never had any arguments or fights. Matt was visibly shaken by Michelle's death and provided every detail of his activities on the day she died. After verifying his alibi, the police were able to eliminate him as a suspect. The ballistic examination results revealed that the crime was committed with a .22 caliber rifle. According to experts, the shot was fired at close range. Given that the incident occurred while Michelle was driving on the interstate, police suspected that the shooter was likely in another vehicle that was driving alongside Michelle's car. At the same time, a new suspect emerged in the case. The police received a tip-off from an insurance company claiming that Michelle's brother, Todd, was seeking payment under her life insurance policy. While insurance-related murders aren't rare, the question was whether this case fit the pattern. Could Todd have killed his sister for the payout? To investigate, the detective visited Todd's house to ask some questions. As the detective pressed Todd about his whereabouts at the time of Michelle's death, it dawned on Todd that he was a suspect. Todd recounted his activities on the day his sister died. He explained that their family was struggling financially and couldn't afford a decent funeral, which is why he contacted the insurance company. He needed the money for Michelle's funeral expenses. The police verified Todd's alibi and discovered that he was in a different part of the city when Michelle died, ruling him out as the shooter. However, Todd still gave the police information that allowed them to find another suspect, Michelle's stepson, Josh. When Michelle married Randy, he already had a son from a previous marriage. At the time of Michelle's death, Josh was already an adult. He was a Marine who returned home from the Army shortly before someone fatally wounded Michelle on the road. Josh knew how to handle weapons, which made him one of the suspects. The police started analyzing whether Josh had motives for committing this crime. The police received a new lead when a woman reported seeing a suspicious vehicle on Interstate 235 at the same time Michelle's car crashed. She described the vehicle as a red Ford F-150 pickup truck, driven erratically, swerving between lanes, as if the driver was chasing someone. The driver was an adult white male wearing a baseball cap, but the woman couldn't provide any additional details. The new information appeared significant, so the investigators decided to investigate further. They re-examined the traffic camera footage, this time focusing on whether a red pickup truck was in the vicinity. The woman's tip proved accurate. The footage showed a red pickup truck tailing Michelle from her workplace. However, the poor video quality prevented the police from identifying the driver's face or the truck's license plates. After reviewing additional camera recordings, the investigators determined that the red pickup truck had been following Michelle's exact route, mirroring her every move. The similarity was unlikely to be a coincidence. Furthermore, as Michelle approached the location of her death, the pickup truck was hot on her heels. This evidence hinted that the perpetrator may have fired the fatal shot while driving, and several suspects were being considered. Detectives quickly learned that Randy Davis, Michelle's husband, owned a red pickup truck that matched the description of the one seen near the crime scene. They immediately went to his house to investigate. Although Randy was not at home, his son Josh, a Marine with professional weapons training, was present. Josh told detectives that on the day of Michelle's death, he and his sister had gone shopping, returned home, and spent the evening watching TV. He also mentioned that his father, Randy, arrived home around 5:30 p.m. that day. However, detectives found Josh's alibi unconvincing and suspected that he might have a motive for the crime. Michelle's decision to pursue half the house value in the divorce proceedings had likely upset Josh, who stood to lose a portion of his inheritance. While these suspicions seemed plausible, there was no physical evidence to support them, and without evidence, an arrest and charges were impossible. While Michelle's family was preparing for her funeral, the police were actively searching for new leads in the case. They visited all the shops and gas stations along the route from her workplace to the location where her body was found, hoping to obtain additional surveillance footage. A few miles from the company where Michelle worked, the police discovered crucial footage at a store that proved to be a significant breakthrough. The store's surveillance camera had captured part of the parking lot, and on the day of Michelle's death, September 11, 2008, it showed a red pickup truck belonging to Randy Davis parking at the entrance around 4 p.m. Although the footage revealed the driver getting out of the truck and entering the store, the poor quality made it impossible for investigators to determine whether the driver was Randy or his son Josh. Further analysis of the footage revealed that over the next 30 minutes, the pickup truck returned to the store several times, but the driver remained in the vehicle. The last time the pickup truck was seen near the store was when Michelle left work, which raised even more questions for the investigators. The police, unable to identify a suspect, reached out to Randy Davis, who eventually made contact and came to the police station. There, the investigators informed him of his rights and asked about his activities on September 11th. Randy mentioned his difficult divorce from Michelle, his wife of 17 years, and claimed to have been at work that day. When questioned about his arrival time at home, Randy hesitated before stating he got home at 3:45 p.m., which contradicted the surveillance footage and his son Josh's testimony, who said his father arrived around 5:30 p.m. The investigators then revealed to Randy that Michelle had died from a gunshot wound, not a car crash, information that had not been previously disclosed. Randy showed little reaction to this news, and when the police asked when he last saw Michelle, he requested a lawyer, ending the conversation. Due to the lack of significant evidence, including the murder weapon, the investigation had no choice but to release him. On September 15, 2008, 4 days after Michelle's death, her family and friends, including Randy Davis, gathered for her funeral. Randy tried to show that her death was a heavy loss for him, even bursting into tears at some point. Help arrived from an unexpected quarter when Josh Davis walked into the police station, accompanied by his lawyer, and expressed his desire to make a statement. Josh claimed that upon returning home from his sister's house, he found his father Randy waiting for him, holding a gun. Randy warned Josh that it would be better for him to stay back, and Josh grasped the implication that his father was trying to prevent him from entering the house, but ultimately failed to do so. Randy drove into the garage and confessed to Josh that he had shot Michelle. He was upset because his wife was filing for divorce and suing him for part of their property, which he refused to accept. On September 11, 2008, Randy took drastic action. He parked his red pickup truck outside the store where Michelle worked and waited for her to leave. Randy drove past the store multiple times, worried that he might miss his opportunity. This is why he appeared on the store's CCTV footage several times after Michelle left work. Eventually, he followed her and waited for the perfect moment to strike. When the time came, he rolled down the passenger side window and fired. Based on Josh's testimony, the police arrested Randy Davis for the murder of Michelle, and he was initially charged with first-degree murder. However, prior to the trial, Randy pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of second-degree deprivation of life in exchange for a shorter sentence. As a result, in 2010, Randy Davis, then 53 years old, was sentenced to 50 years in prison. By pleading guilty, Randy avoided a trial. Michelle's brother, Todd Kozner, expressed mixed emotions about the outcome. While we may not have received full justice without a trial, we did get what we wanted, an admission of guilt from Randy, Todd said. He emphasized the devastating impact Randy's actions had on their family. Randy was like family to me for 17 years, and I cared deeply for him. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Gabby Doolin. Gabby Doolin was born on December 26, 2007, in the small town of Scottsville, Kentucky, with a population of just over 4,000 people. Scottsville was mostly a farming community where many folks knew each other well, or at least knew someone from each local family. Like in many similar small towns, there weren't a lot of entertainment options in Scottsville. The only major thing for locals was school sports, particularly football. The local school had pretty decent fields for football, baseball, and tennis, where they regularly hosted games and competitions. It became a sort of tradition for locals to attend these activities, especially if their children were involved. Gabby's family was no different. Her parents had 3 kids, 2 sons and a daughter. The oldest boy was on the school's football team, while Gabby herself got into cheerleading in November 2015 when she was 7. Their town was gearing up for the biggest football game of the year, and Gabby's older brother was on the team. However, Gabby was more interested in just hanging out and having fun with other kids than in the game itself. Her parents initially planned to leave Gabby at home with their youngest son under the care of a relative, but Gabby managed to convince them to take her with them. On the evening of November 14th, they headed to the school field. Besides the local crowd, there were also many folks from the other county who came to watch the game and support their team. As soon as their family arrived at the stadium, Gabby spotted her friends and asked her mom if she could go play with them. Her mom agreed, but warned her to stay within the school grounds and stick with the other kids. After that, her mom went to the bleachers and Gabby ran off to her friends. From then on, Gabby dashed back and forth to her mom a few times before going off to play again. At some point, she also came to her dad, who was in an announcement room, and Gabby asked him for some money to buy some snacks at the concession stand before darting away. Sometime later, Gabby's friends ran up to her mom in the bleachers. She glanced at the group and immediately noticed her daughter wasn't among them. The girls asked if she had seen Gabby, and they seemed visibly worried. The woman replied that she hadn't seen her for quite a while. She then asked what was going on, and the girls explained they had decided to play hide and seek. Gabby was supposed to find them, and they hid in the restroom, but time passed, and Gabby never found them. Thinking they had won, the girls left their hiding spot and went to look for her, but Gabby was nowhere to be found. They called her name, checked all the places they had been playing before, but their friend seemed to have vanished into thin air. That's when they thought Gabby might have gone to the bleachers to her mom and ran there. Her mother immediately started to panic and went to her husband, but Gabby wasn't there either. She told him that Gabby was missing, and he rushed to search the area around the stadium. Meanwhile, the mother went to the concession stand where her daughter had wanted to buy some snacks and began searching for her there. On the way, the parents met their friends and informed them about their daughter's disappearance. Hearing that, they joined the worried parents, helping with the search. After scouring the entire area around the stadium and finding no sign of Gabby, the parents went back and made an announcement over the loudspeakers, hoping Gabby would hear it, but that yielded no results either. By that time, there was a break in the game and people were returning to the bleachers. The parents continued asking everyone if they had seen Gabby, and some of them joined in the search as well. They went out again to search the area around the stadium and asked the staff to turn on flashlights around the baseball field, which led to a small forest. The adults walked through it, but still couldn't find her. By this time, about 20 minutes had passed since her disappearance, and the parents decided to call the police. Officers immediately arrived at the school, listened to the parents' and Gabby's friends' accounts, and began searching. The local police department had little experience with such serious cases, as child disappearances rarely occurred in their small town. The officers immediately considered the worst-case scenario that someone had abducted or attacked her. In that case, they faced one problem. The likely perpetrator was probably at the stadium watching the game, which was about to end any minute. So the officers realized they had very little time, and soon people would start going home, including the alleged perpetrator. Eventually, they decided to halt the game and lock down the stadium, keeping everyone inside the building. Officers watched every exit to prevent anyone from slipping away. The police didn't inform people about what was happening to avoid disrupting the search efforts. If everyone knew that the police were considering the possibility that a kidnapper of a 7-year-old girl was in the same vicinity as them, the situation could quickly escalate. Meanwhile, state police arrived at the school and began searching the area. They reached the baseball field and headed into the woods. After some distance into the trees, they stumbled upon a small creek and saw her body in it. They identified her as Gabby and called for an ambulance to take the body to the medical examiner. However, even a visual inspection was enough to suggest that the cause of death was asphyxiation, as there were distinct marks on her neck. Part of her clothing was also missing, leading the police to suspect that the victim had been sexually assaulted. Gabby's mother saw the ambulance near the woods and thought the police had found her daughter who needed medical attention. She rushed there, but the police stopped her as they didn't want the woman to see this horrifying scene. Now that the police were dealing with a murder, they decided to move everyone from the stadium to the school gym. Investigators believed that the killer was likely among them, so they needed to quickly figure out how to identify them. They spoke to Gabby's parents and told them about what likely happened to their daughter. Investigators also asked if they had any suspicions about who could have committed such a heinous act. Perhaps they had noticed someone suspicious, or someone had threatened their family. But Gabby's parents insisted they had no idea who could have done this. Detectives then talked to Gabby's friends and asked if they had seen anything strange that evening. Maybe someone had been watching or following them. But the girls said they couldn't recall anything like that. The police also brought them to the gym and asked them to look carefully at the people present, hoping they might remember something, but it didn't lead to anything. The lead detective continued to believe that the victim's friends might have seen the kidnapper, but either they were afraid to point him out or simply didn't understand the significance of their observations due to their age. He kept asking them to remember every moment of that evening, and finally, one of them mentioned that when they hid from Gabby in the restroom, she saw a man near the door. She remembered almost no details about his appearance except that he was wearing a denim jacket. The police spoke to the cashier who sold tickets to the game, and he also recalled the man with the denim jacket hanging on his arm. He added that this person seemed strange and intoxicated to him. However, they still couldn't identify this man. At that moment, the police gradually interviewed the attendees of the game, and pretty soon, everyone learned why they were being held there. Realizing that they might be in the same room with the killer, people were frightened, especially for their kids, but still cooperated with the police and answered their questions. Investigators cross-referenced the list of names of all the men in the gym with a sex offenders registry, but there were no matches. The police also sent officers to the homes of several such offenders living within close proximity, but they all had solid alibis, and none of them were near the school. Meanwhile, officers continued to interview people at the school, and they soon came across some interesting leads. Several individuals told them that during the game they saw a man named Timothy Madden near the women's restroom behaving strangely. He was a local resident, so many people knew him, but according to witnesses, that evening he was acting suspiciously. They also mentioned that he was wearing a denim jacket, the same description provided by one of Gabby's friends who had also seen a man near the restroom. Another witness was a distant relative of Timothy. He mentioned that during the game, Timothy seemed kind of off, and his younger son was playing on the field. But according to the witness, Timothy, who usually was very involved in his son's sports achievements, wasn't even paying attention to the field and seemed lost. Several more witnesses told the police that Timothy's behavior seemed strange to them, prompting investigators to talk to him. It was already nighttime, and they had to release almost everyone from the school. They decided to visit him, but first asked the local sheriff what he thought about Timothy. The sheriff said that he had known him practically all his life and highly doubted that he was capable of such a crime. Timothy had almost no criminal record except for some traffic fines, and he had never been involved in any suspicious situations before. Timothy lived with his wife and 5 children, and the police decided to go talk to him immediately. When they knocked on his door, Timothy opened it, and the officers asked if he knew why they were there. He replied that he had heard about her murder, but had nothing to do with it. Detectives then decided to try one trick and asked him a loaded question. They asked whether he had any explanation for several videos provided by eyewitnesses, showing him talking to Gabby shortly before her murder. There were no videos or witnesses, and the question was designed to prompt the man to reveal some new information if he indeed had something to do with the crime. At first, Timothy said he didn't know, but then he quickly corrected himself. He admitted that he did talk to Gabby that evening near the stadium. According to him, he stepped out to smoke, and at that moment, several girls ran past him. Shortly after, Gabby passed by and asked if he had seen her friends because they were playing hide and seek, and she needed to find them. Timothy pointed her in the right direction, and she ran off. The detectives found it suspicious how quickly Timothy changed his story. Moreover, his account indicated that he spoke to the victim just minutes before her disappearance, and at that time, there were no witnesses outside the stadium, so it gave him the opportunity to commit the crime. The detectives also asked if he would have any explanation if they found his DNA on the victim's body, and Timothy calmly replied no. Finally, they asked him to provide them with a DNA sample and the clothing he wore at the stadium. He agreed to both requests, but as soon as Timothy handed over the clothing to the police, they discovered some stains on it. There was something resembling blood stains on the pants, denim jacket, and even underwear. Detectives asked if he could explain it, and Timothy claimed that they were insane and that it wasn't blood, but some dirt. However, the police thought otherwise, although they needed to wait for the DNA analysis results before they could arrest him. Even though this case was a priority for the lab, it still took several days for the experts to examine all the samples and conduct the analysis. The forensic pathologist soon finished examining the body and confirmed that Gabby's cause of death was manual strangulation. He also confirmed that the victim had been brutally assaulted and extracted a biological sample of the perpetrator, which was sent to the laboratory the day after the murder. Something unexpected happened. The police received an anonymous letter from someone who reported a suspicious individual present at the game. The author wrote down the model of his car and even the license plate, which allowed the investigators to quickly identify the owner of the vehicle. It turned out to be a student living half an hour's drive from Scottsville. The police went there and began questioning him, but the guy claimed he hadn't been to any game and hadn't even heard of the murder. He added that he was at work that evening, and the police found undoubtful confirmation of his alibi. He was crossed off the list of suspects, but the author of the letter was never found. Perhaps someone decided to frame him or play a cruel prank, but the guy was truly innocent. The police soon received another lead. Several people reported strange behavior by a local 16-year-old boy. He told different people that he had been at the game, but then claimed he hadn't attended it. The young man also mentioned seeing girls playing hide and seek. Detectives found out that this boy was Timothy Madden's son, but that wasn't the most surprising revelation. They learned that just 2 weeks before the murder, the boy had become angry with his father and held a knife to his throat, threatening to kill him. Knowing this information, the police headed to speak with him. But there was a problem. They needed the presence of the minor's parents, and his mother refused to provide a DNA sample, leaving the police empty-handed. In Scottsville, a small town where everyone knew each other, rumors spread like wildfire. People heard that the police were looking into the Madden family regarding Gabby's murder, sparking various theories. Some thought one of Madden's troubled older sons could be responsible, while others suspected Madden himself or thought he might be covering for his sons. Gabby's parents also became aware of these rumors, which came as a big shock to them. Gabby's father had known Timothy since 3rd grade and also knew his whole family. Their sons played on the same football team, and their daughters were cheerleading together. Both families were close, even sitting near each other at the game. With all this in mind, Gabby's parents found it hard to believe that anyone from their circle could have been involved in the murder. After the rumors spread around town, something else happened. The eldest son of the Madden family, who was 20 years old, began contacting local officers on social media. He used foul language and threatened them, demanding they leave his family alone. He was immediately arrested for the threats, and the police quickly discovered that there was an active warrant for his arrest in another town. It turned out he was suspected of assaulting a minor girl. They brought him in for questioning, and the young man claimed he was simply frustrated by the accusations against his family. He also said he had nothing to do with the murder and that he was at his cousin's house in the neighboring town that evening. He agreed to provide his DNA sample, which was also sent to the laboratory on November 20th. 6 days after the murder, Gabby's funeral took place. Hundreds of people came to say goodbye, not only from Scottsville, but also from other towns. People donated a significant amount of money to Gabby's parents to help cover the funeral and farewell ceremony expenses. Meanwhile, the lab completed the DNA analysis, and compared the blood and semen samples with Timothy and his son's DNA. The results showed a complete match. The semen found on the victim's body belonged to Timothy Madden, and the blood on his clothes belonged to Gabby. Upon receiving this news, detectives went to the funeral when Gabby's parents were alone and informed them of the discovery of the killer. At the same time, the police officers went to Timothy's house and he was arrested. As he was being transported from the police station, he shouted to the gathered reporters that he was innocent. Later, he claimed that the blood on his clothes was his own, as he had scratched himself passing by a fence, even though initially he had told the police that it wasn't blood at all but mud. With the DNA match in hand, the investigators took the case to court and the prosecution stated they would seek the death penalty. During the trial preparation, Timothy's lawyer insisted his client was innocent and that the origin of the evidence raised serious questions. He argued that during the supposed murder, Timothy was at the stadium filming the game, even though Timothy himself had told the police he saw Gabby around the same time. The lawyer also tried to point out the fact that Gabby's body was found in a creek, but his client's clothes were dry when he returned to the stadium. Timothy's mother, who lived with him, stated that Timothy returned home in clean clothes, didn't look troubled, and behaved as usual. However, the prosecution pointed out that all these arguments crumbled in the face of the fact that the suspect's semen was found on the victim's body. There could be no other explanation for this, and therefore, there was no doubt about Timothy's involvement. According to the police, his account of that evening contains some portion of the truth. He could have indeed stepped out of the stadium during the game and encountered Gabby, who was looking for her friends. She knew Timothy well because he was the father of one of her friends. She might have approached him and asked where the other girls had gone, and that's when he devised a plan. He could have said they ran into the woods behind the baseball field and offered to escort Gabby there. Once they were a few hundred yards away from the school, he could have assaulted and killed her, then returned to the game. The wait for the trial dragged on for years, much to Gabby's family's dismay. They wanted the murderer to be punished, but due to bureaucracy, the case progressed slowly. In 2019, 4 years after the murder, the parties began discussing a possible plea deal. The prosecution offered to drop the death penalty in exchange for a life sentence, with Timothy having to admit his guilt. Gabby's parents agreed to this option because the endless wait for the trial was a heavy burden for them. Moreover, if the trial finally began, they would have to attend hearings for months, essentially reliving their daughter's death all over again. Timothy, who kept insisting on his innocence, eventually agreed and confessed. However, the terms of the deal didn't require him to reveal the details of what he did. He just had to admit his guilt. These terms didn't satisfy Gabby's family because they wanted the perpetrator to fully confess to what he had done to their daughter. During the court hearing, Gabby's father started yelling at Timothy, while the defendant's relatives began shouting at Gabby's family. Eventually, the judge had to take a break and separate them. In the end, Timothy received a life sentence and went to serve it in a maximum security prison. But that's not all. In 2016, a year after Gabby's murder, something else happened involving Timothy Madden. A boy from a neighboring state saw a news report about the crime and recognized Timothy. Several years ago, he and his friend were walking near a mall parking lot when an adult man approached them. He tried to convince the boys to get into his car for a ride, but they found the offer extremely strange and ran away from him. The friend's relative contacted the police, and according to the boy who saw the news report, he was no other than Timothy Madden. However, there was no substantial evidence for this case, so it didn't progress any further. Nevertheless, if Timothy had indeed attempted to abduct 2 boys in another state, it could tell us about his true nature more clearly. Perhaps before Gabby's murder, he had been trying to find other victims but had no success. And on that evening when she approached him near the stadium, he decided to seize the opportunity to satisfy his horrific fantasies. When Manhattan resident and mother of two, Sheila Danvey, was found deceased in her bathtub in December 2009, the police initially ruled her death an accident. However, about 6 months after the incident, suspicions led her family to exhume the woman's body. The subsequent autopsy revealed shocking new details, prompting the launch of a murder investigation. Sheila Danvey was a New Yorker who owned a luxury apartment on Manhattan's Upper West Side. At time of her death, she was in the process of divorcing Rod Sin, and they were embroiled in a custody battle over their 2 children, 9-year-old Anna and 3-year-old Miles. The ex-husband resided next door in the same complex, and they saw each other periodically. Their relationship was very strained. People who knew Sheila described her as a loving and caring mother who always prioritized her children above all else. They noted her friendly and gentle nature, along with her outer and inner beauty. She was highly intelligent and accomplished in every respect. Colleagues regarded her as a professional in her business. She was a successful Wall Street investment banker with several $1 million to her name. The sudden and tragic death of Sheila came as a shock to everyone who knew her. She had no known enemies at work or in her personal life at that time. She was single and not involved in any romantic relationships. Sheila devoted herself wholeheartedly to raising her children, which was her top priority. On the morning of that tragic day, December 31, 2009, Sheila's daughter Anna woke up first and went to the bathroom. There she encountered a horrific scene. Her mother's body floating face down in the bathtub, with water tinged red with blood. Additionally, the closet door directly above the bathtub had been ripped off its hinges. Shocked and frightened, Anna ran out of the bathroom and immediately dialed her father's number, reporting that something terrible had happened to her mom. A man living nearby quickly rushed to the apartment and, upon entering the bathroom, found his former wife unconscious. This account encapsulates the professional background and personal tragedy surrounding Sheila Danvey's untimely demise that spurred further inquiries into what truly transpired on that fateful day. Rod notified 911, and emergency services were dispatched to the address. Meanwhile, the man took her body from the bathtub, covered her with a blanket, and tried to give her CPR as instructed by the operator. He hoped to resuscitate the woman, but it didn't work. By then, medics had already arrived. When they entered the apartment, they found him still in the bathtub, not giving up on trying to save her. Medics checked her pulse. There was none. The body was cold. They pronounced the death of a 47-year-old woman as they observed signs of rigor mortis, determining that she had died about an hour earlier. Rod was grief-stricken. Crying with his children, he was deeply worried about what had happened. The medics had to sedate him because he was so distressed. Upon arriving at the scene, police officers examined the bathtub closely. They noticed a broken cabinet door and presumed it was related to the incident. It appeared that while reaching for something in the cabinet, she slipped and fell, hitting her head on the tub. This caused her to lose consciousness and drown. The head injury caused significant bleeding, explaining the red color of the water. Everything indicated an accident. There were no signs of forced entry or anything missing from the home. Given these factors, the case was closed as an accident. Due to their religious beliefs, Sheila's family requested no autopsy be performed once her death was ruled accidental. She was subsequently buried. However, following her funeral, doubts began to emerge among her loved ones about the nature of her sudden demise. Sheila's relatives highlighted inconsistencies. She never took baths with water due to time constraints and always showered instead, raising questions about why she would be found in a full bathtub. Additionally, they recalled she had undergone a keratin hair treatment just a day before her death, something that required keeping her hair dry for 3 days afterward. Given these circumstances, and considering how diligent Sheila usually was about following such rules, her loved ones began suspecting that her death might not have been an unfortunate accident. They wondered if foul play could have somehow been responsible for this tragedy. Sheila was known to avoid bathing in a bathtub. It went against her habits and couldn't be true. The suspicions grew so strong that her relatives asked the police to start an investigation into her death and requested that her body be exhumed. Initially, the police did not take these requests seriously because everything seemed obvious. A woman fell in the bathtub, hit her head, and died. However, the relatives managed to convince detectives to conduct an autopsy on Sheila's body. Her body was exhumed in April 2010 and sent for autopsy. This is when it was discovered that Sheila had been strangled before being placed in the bathtub. The forensic expert determined that she had been strangled with such force that her hyoid bone was broken and several ribs were also fractured. The head trauma wasn't serious and couldn't have caused her death. It appeared that Sheila died as a result of a violent struggle while being choked. The perpetrator might have had martial arts training and performed the chokehold with precision. Additionally, a forensic medical examiner who reviewed photos of the deceased noted fresh bruises on her arms and severe bruising around her eyes. In light of these new findings, law enforcement officials had no choice but to launch an investigation into Sheila's murder. The investigation was complicated by the fact that several months had passed since the tragedy, and no one initially suspected homicide, leaving no evidence at the scene. Detectives only had a few photos taken by officers who arrived for the initial report. Investigators believed that over those months, all traces would have likely been destroyed during bathroom cleanups. Nevertheless, despite significant doubts, they couldn't ignore this path forward. Upon arriving at the deceased woman's apartment for an inspection, police officers discovered that her children and husband resided there. The husband courteously permitted the detectives to enter and examine the premises. The CSIs proceeded to the bathroom, finding nothing of interest as expected. Rod mentioned that after his wife's death, the bathroom was meticulously cleaned multiple times with a cleaning agent, erasing all traces of blood. This thorough cleaning aimed to spare their children from distressing memories associated with their mother. The man had received authorization from police officers present on the day of the death to perform this cleaning. There were no witnesses to the crime. Only young children were in the apartment at the time. They were interviewed, but reported neither seeing nor hearing anything suspicious. Additionally, investigators observed no signs of forced entry into the house, suggesting that either the perpetrator possessed a key or was willingly let inside by someone. It was likely that the woman knew her killer, leading detectives to believe it was someone familiar to her. After speaking with her loved ones, they learned that Sheila had no enemies or ill-wishers, but had endured conflicts with her ex-husband over divorce and child custody matters. Sheila and Rod first met in 1998 while working on Wall Street. Sheila was already a successful professional then, serving as a vice president at a major financial company, while Rod was a novice investment trader getting started in the field. Despite this difference in experience, they quickly fell in love and began an intense romance, marrying just months later. Their swift marriage surprised many. Some friends even advised Sheila to take her time and assess her feelings before committing to someone new in her life. They worried he might not have genuine intentions, seeing how rapidly he captured her heart. However, blinded by love, Sheila ignored these concerns. The newlyweds moved into Sheila's luxurious apartment in New York's upscale Upper West Side neighborhood near Central Park. Before long, they welcomed a daughter named Anna into their lives. Though motherhood occupied much of Sheila's time initially, she soon returned to work and hired a nanny to assist with childcare duties. Sheila advanced to a fruitful career and eventually ran a company. Meanwhile, Rod struggled to find success in this endeavor despite his wife's support. Ultimately, he abandoned the job and turned his attention to pursuing his passions. Rod was passionate about martial arts, earning a black belt and actively participating in competitions. He convinced his wife that his future lay in sports, where he believed he could excel and become a coach. She believed him. However, Rod's focus shifted again, first to backgammon, then to various other hobbies that he changed frequently. His behavior exhibited signs of immaturity throughout this period, as he relied heavily on his wife for support and occasionally solicited funds from his parents. The couple welcomed a second child, a son. On the surface, they appeared content. However, Rod concealed a double life from his wife. In addition to experimenting with numerous hobbies, Rod engaged in extramarital affairs. Initially, he was involved with one woman, then two, but eventually expanded these activities. His address book contained around 20 women with whom he regularly met. Rod even created a schedule on his computer to manage these appointments without confusion. He connected with new acquaintances online and didn't shy away from meeting women of questionable character. Rod portrayed himself as a successful banker from Wall Street, attracting attention from women who aspired to secure such a promising partner. At home, however, he treated his wife poorly, often with insult and humiliation, reducing her to tears. But deception has its limits. Rod's deceit was ultimately uncovered by his own wife. Suspecting infidelity for some time, she hired a private detective who collected comprehensive evidence against him. The investigation revealed that Rod was simultaneously communicating online with 860 women. Confronted with the evidence, Rod did not deny it. He admitted that monogamy wasn't something he could uphold despite claiming love for her and seeing her as suitable for their shared life. He proposed an open relationship, a suggestion met with firm refusal from his wife, leading her to the conclusion that she could no longer endure his behavior. Exhausted by his antics and deceptions, she decided to file for divorce. In April 2009, the woman decided to kick her husband, Kay, out of their apartment, but felt pity and rented him a place not far from home. She thought he had nowhere else to go. Later, she regretted that decision deeply. After moving out, Rod realized that a divorce would mean losing all his assets as well as the lavish lifestyle he was accustomed to. He knew that without money, his new girlfriends would lose interest in him. Therefore, he began threatening Sheila that he would take her children away and pursue her relentlessly if they divorced. Sheila wanted to avoid trouble and contemplated how to resolve the problem with her ex-husband. She offered him a $250,000 payoff to make him go away. However, Rod rejected the offer and demanded more money along with full custody of their children. He intentionally threatened and manipulated Sheila by exploiting what mattered most to her, her children, despite knowing that he had no genuine interest in them. Sheila's lawyer advised against negotiating with him, confident that the evidence would sway the court in their favor. Rod's anger only grew due to Sheila's refusal to yield. He took drastic measures by informing her workplace that she was taking illegal substances. Even though everyone knew this was untrue, Sheila's supervisor couldn't ignore it and sent her for testing, which proved she was clean. When this plan failed, Rod reported his wife to the tax office, but even this investigation showed she was compliant with the law. Determined to cause more trouble, he began using his own set of keys to enter Sheila's apartment and create disturbances. Rod then falsely accused Sheila of molesting their 3-year-old son. The boy was referred to a child psychologist who confirmed nothing inappropriate had occurred. All this turmoil pushed Sheila towards a nervous breakdown due to the relentless problems caused by her ex-husband. In court, however, her lawyer successfully found Rod guilty of slander, and consequently, he was banned from communicating with both his children and his wife. The wife obtained a restraining order against Rod just a couple of days prior to her death. She communicated with her lawyer, expressing her intent to modify her will. She aimed to exclude her ex-husband, who was slated to receive $4 million. Instead, she wished to leave her entire fortune to her children. The lawyer agreed to implement the necessary changes and scheduled an appointment for the woman to sign the updated documents on January 1st. However, Sheila passed away before she had the chance to do so, which raised suspicions. The relatives found Sheila's sudden death peculiar and linked it with Rod's unusual conduct. They asserted that Sheila was deeply fearful of him. The nanny reported hearing Rod verbally abuse and threaten his spouse frequently. On one occasion, she even witnessed him push Sheila, causing her to fall. This led the nanny to fear how abusive he might have been in private. Investigators began suspecting Rod as well, since he appeared to have a clear motive. He seemed aware that Sheila intended to amend her will, which would remove him as a beneficiary. Consequently, he had a substantial financial incentive, benefiting both from an inheritance and a sizable $1 million life insurance policy on Sheila. In addition, detectives knew Rod possessed a key to his ex-wife's apartment, thus enabling him easy access. It was possible for him to commit the crime without obstacles and leave undetected. The way Rod allegedly left their young children alone with their deceased mother struck detectives as incredibly insensitive. This harrowing experience severely impacted Sheila's daughter, who required long-term psychological counseling due to the trauma. Despite these strong suspicions and precautions taken by investigators regarding Rod's potential involvement in Sheila's death, there was no direct evidence, such as DNA or fingerprints, linking him conclusively to the crime. Because of this lack of concrete evidence, the case remained contentious in terms of legal proceedings. Hence, police officers were reluctant to arrest or charge him formally. The investigation continued, and during this period, her insurance and inheritance were suspended. A new custody trial for the deceased's children began as well. Rod sought custody to gain access to his wife's finances through the children. However, her parents strongly opposed this because they believed Rod was at fault for their daughter's death. Additionally, Shell's words revealed that Rod disliked children, mistreated them, and frequently beat them. This was corroborated by the children during the trial. Even his own parents testified against him, accusing him of abusing the children and stealing $80,000 from them. Consequently, custody of the children was awarded to the parents of the deceased. In the meantime, Rod found himself without support and for the first time had to fend for himself. Lacking any means of livelihood, he secured a job as a debt collector. His aggressive tactics instilled fear in debtors who lodged complaints against him. Ultimately, his career in debt collection did not flourish, and he was terminated from his position. As time passed, the police struggled to find solid evidence against Rod. This case might have remained unresolved had one of Rod's former lovers not come forward in 2015. The woman finally decided to inform the police that Rod had confessed to her about murdering his wife. According to her, Rod's greed for his wife's money drove him to commit the act. He showed no interest in the children, except as a means to gain financial benefit through custody. Additionally, she provided shockingly new information. Rod had planned to kill his late wife's parents as well, and disguise their deaths as accidental events in order to regain custody and access his deceased wife's money. However, all his plans unraveled one by one. At one point, he even considered involving his daughter, who was a teenager at that time. In the realization of the plan, he tried to convince her that charges of harassment should be brought against her grandfather. But the girl categorically refused to participate in this. To prove her words, the former mistress presented the police with voice messages sent to her from Rod's cell phone. Now the police had new evidence. Based on the testimony of his mistress and these reports, Rod was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife in November 2015. This news came as a blow to Rod. He was confident of his impunity and planned to get away with murdering his wife, taking all her millions with him. The trial began in 2019, during which Rod denied all the allegations against him. He denied planning the murder, being in his wife's apartment that morning, killing her, and planning to kill her parents to get close to the money. On the prosecution side, there were numerous witnesses who spoke about Rod's abuse of his wife and children, as well as his affairs on the left. They discussed his intentions to gain access to all of his wife's money and control over financial matters in the event of a divorce. According to the prosecutor, Rod was motivated by money to get rid of his wife. He had a key to the apartment and knew how to perform a chokehold, which was used to kill her Sheila. Though there was no direct evidence against him in this case, there was enough circumstantial proof. A mistress appeared at trial and testified against Rod. This finally convinced the jury that he was guilty. Rod's children encouraged them to ask the court not to send their father to prison, given they had already lost one parent and did not want to lose another. The 12-year-old son spoke at trial, and although the 18-year-old daughter was absent, she relayed a plea asking for mercy for their father. However, these requests did not sway the jury. They found him guilty. Rod was sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 25 years. Currently, he is incarcerated at Ada Correctional Institution in Ada, New York. Known as the heart of the Bay, Hayward, California is the central point to other cities in the East Bay area. Its residents are described as having a lot of love and community spirit, and its suburban vibe makes it an ideal place to live for families. With the second most diverse population in California, Hayward is as welcoming as its people. Hayward is home to the beautiful Cal State University, and in 1988, Michaela Garrick and her family called it home. 9-year-old Michaela Joy Garrick was called a miracle child by her parents Susan Murch and Rod Garrick. For 5 years, Susan and Rod turned to doctors and fertility treatments before finally welcoming their beautiful daughter into the world. Michaela was born on January 24, 1979, in Oakland, California. Although it was a struggle to conceive Michaela, her parents called her their blessing, as soon after her birth, they welcomed another daughter, Libby, and a son, Alex. In 1986, they made the move to Hayward, where they decided to set down roots and raise their growing family. Michaela was described as a bright and lively child. She was well-behaved and listened to everything her parents told her. Sharon was described as a very caring mother, sometimes considered overprotective. She'd made sure her children were always kept close to home and under no circumstances wandered far without adult supervision. No one could blame her, though. The 1980s saw an increase in child abductions, particularly in the California area. It was a Saturday morning, November 19, 1988, and Michaela had just finished eating breakfast with her family. When a best friend, 9-year-old Katrina Rodriguez, came over to ask Sharon if she and Michaela could go down to the local grocery store to buy snacks, the response was initially a firm no. Upset but not deterred, Michaela begged and pleaded with her mother, promising they'd be safe and come back quickly. Knowing her little girl was going to grow up sooner or later, Sharon relented and allowed them to go while reminding them to be careful. She gave Michaela $5, and the girls excitedly grabbed their scooters. Michaela turned to Sharon and said, "I love you, Mom," before they made their way down the block and out of sight as Sharon watched them go. Her husband, Rod, decided to go out and do some work on the car, while Sharon went back in to clear up the breakfast dishes, unaware that in the next few minutes, her life was going to change forever. Michaela and Katrina excitedly rode their scooters toward the Rainbow Market on Mission Boulevard. Parking their scooters just in front of the store, both girls make their way inside to buy some snacks. After buying 2 Mountain Dew sodas, 2 sticks of beef jerky, and 2 pieces of cherry toffee, they walked out of the store, completely forgetting about their scooters as they chatted about plans for the holiday. Before they could leave the parking lot, though, both girls realized their scooters were still outside the store. One was missing, and Michaela and Katrina decided to split up to find the other scooter. Michaela spotted it first. It had been moved about 3 parking spaces away and left next to a car. Without thinking, Michaela ran over to the scooter and bent down to grab hold of the handlebars. In a split second, a man had jumped out of the car and grabbed Michaela around the waist before shoving her into the back seat. Like a deer in the headlights, Katrina stood frozen to the spot as she heard her friend's screams and watched her struggle in the abductor's grip. The man peeled out of the parking space before speeding out on Mission Boulevard, heading toward Union City. Katrina immediately ran back into the store and told the cashier, Rona Ronalyn, that Michaela had just been kidnapped. Rona called the local police, who arrived in record time to the crime scene. She also contacted Katrina's father and told them what just happened at the store. Back at their home, Sharon was busy washing up the dishes when she heard frantic shouting from the outside. Rod, her husband, burst through the front door, telling her Michaela had just been kidnapped outside the Rainbow Market. Along with Katrina's father, they made their way down to the store to find police swarming the area and speaking to customers and staff from the store. Katrina was inconsolable, and was allowed to go back home with her father. Rod and Sharon remained behind, hoping to get some answers. But from deep within, a seed of fear took root as Sharon remembered a poem Michaela had written. Sharon remembered an unsettling incident just a week earlier. She'd woken up to find Michaela sitting at the breakfast table, writing in the early hours of the morning. When she asked her what she was doing, Michaela told her mother she was writing a poem, but was being vague. Sharon kept asking her what the poem was about, and Michaela said she woke up after hearing noises coming from the attic and thought about people who had been kidnapped and locked away in the attic. She then told Sharon that her poem was about people who were kidnapped and being held captive, not people who were kidnapped and killed. Sharon at the time found it rather ominous that a child as cheerful as Michaela would write a poem like this. Looking back now, she believed Michaela may have written the poem as a kind of prophecy or premonition. Rona, the cashier, was fortunately able to remember the man who allegedly took Michaela. She described him to police as a white male in his 30s with a mustache. She was able to make up the color of the car as being either burgundy or maroon, but could not give them details about the make or model. Rona told police that the man had parked his car and got out, but not entered the store. Instead, he looked on the outside and looked through the window, watching the girls and other customers. She also had a feeling he was planning on possibly robbing the store. A sketch artist quickly drew a composite sketch and circulated the picture to all police stations in the area and news outlets. Investigators found the scooter and took it in as evidence. From the scooter handle, they were able to lift a latent handprint. The print was filed away to be used to identify the kidnapper, but beyond that, there were few clues they could follow up on. By the end of the first day after the abduction, the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the investigation into Michaela's abduction. Given the recent spate of child abductions, the FBI were sure there must have been some link between Michaela's disappearance and that of the other missing children. However, police soon realized that Katrina may be able to give a bit more information on the suspect, as she was the key eyewitness to the abduction. 2 days after the incident, investigators paid a visit to Katrina's family home, and together with her parents, sat down and spoke to her. What she revealed had investigators reeling. The description of the kidnapper was drastically different to the one given by the store cashier. Katrina described the man as being a white male in his early 20s with long, dirty blonde hair. She said he had severe acne that scarred his face and described his eyes as being blue. Katrina remembered his eyes in particular and said to investigators, "He had fox eyes. He looked right at me, but didn't even see me." She also told investigators that his car had been either beige or tan, box-shaped, with visible body damage. This new description was concerning, as investigators realized the most crucial 48 hours had passed while they were looking for the wrong person. The posters were reprinted with the new suspect's image and redistributed in hopes of being able to garner new leads. With the new information, though, investigators now began knocking on the doors of all sex offenders in the local area, asking questions. Volunteers came out in their numbers, knocking on doors and handing out posters that included a description of Michaela's clothes: white t-shirt with the word Metro written across it, rolled up blue denim jeans, black Mary Jane shoes, and pearl-colored feather shoot earrings. When no one reported any signs of Michaela anywhere in the nearby suburbs, police extended the search to include McGarren National Park and Niles Canyon that were just minutes from the Garrick family home. This search began following a tip from 3 hikers who allegedly saw footprints in the forested area belonging to one adult and one child. After they'd followed the tracks, they found a blanket and empty fast food containers. The psychological profile also pointed out that the kidnapper was likely to take Michaela to an isolated area. Helicopters were fitted with infrared thermal cameras to pick up any signs of a heat signature within the dense wooded areas. Police officers searched on horseback and foot. All these efforts yielded no results. Michaela had vanished along with her kidnapper into thin air. Michaela's disappearance reached the national news. Her story was featured on Unsolved Mysteries and was one of the first child abductions to feature on America's Most Wanted. Her face was printed on milk cartons, and the Missing Children's Program printed over 50 million mail-in cards to homes around the country with pictures of Michaela, a description of her clothes, and a composite sketch of the kidnappers. San Francisco 49ers quarterback Joe Montana came out in support of the Garrick family and made an appeal to the public to come forward with any information. A reward fund of $70,000 was posted during this time for any information regarding Michaela's whereabouts. Within the first year of her disappearance, police had received over 5,000 tips, most of which turned out to be rumors. But no one was ready to give up. Sharon herself followed leads, some stretching as far as Russia, but nothing yielded any results. It would take another 4 years before investigators received a new tip that they believed could be real. In that time, over 15,000 tips were received, and police were clutching at each one, hoping it could shed light on the missing girls case. Between 1991 and 1992, an inmate in Indiana came forward with information regarding Michaela's disappearance. Roger Haggard, who was serving an 11-year sentence for a burglary charge, alleged that he helped a friend bury her body in a gladiolus field in Union City. However, investigators were not initially interested, believing it could have been a wild goose chase. When Haggard realized the investigators were not taking his claims seriously, he instead turned to the media. He wrote a letter in 1992 to the San Francisco Chronicle claiming to know who kidnapped Michaela and where she'd been buried. He promised to lead investigators to her body. The media attention and public outcry forced investigators to fly Haggard to California in order to testify in front of a grand jury. Under oath, Haggard repeated the claims he'd been making to investigators. Haggard promised to lead investigators not only to Michaela's remains, but to the home of the alleged killer. The next day, Haggard, along with a team of investigators, searched the field that he claimed Michaela's body had been buried in. In a shocking twist, after 8 hours of intense searching, Haggard allegedly told police that he'd made a false claim after all. He told investigators that he allegedly wanted to give the Garrick family a sense of peace after all these years. Haggard was charged with perjury and sentenced to another 6 years in prison and ordered to pay Michaela's family $6,000 in damages for giving them false hope. Each new lead was about to take investigators down a darker path than they'd imagined. Another person of interest had long been on police radar in 1991. Timothy Binder was a 43-year-old sewage treatment plant worker. He was married with a family, but investigators were tipped off by parents in the East Bay area about Binder's creepy behavior. Parents alleged that he'd been sending young girls gifts and money in order to get closer to them. Some of the letters were reportedly written backwards and could only be read by using a mirror. Investigators looked at the Binder's background and discovered that Binder drove a light blue van with a license plate that read, "Love You." The inside of his van was allegedly covered with pictures of little children, crayon drawings, and Bible verses. According to reports, he'd been arrested for attempting to lure 2 young girls into his van, but the charges were dropped. Binder, investigators discovered, had a knack for inserting himself into the cases surrounding missing children. He had made contact with Michaela's mother, Sharon, following her disappearance in November of 1988. Prior to that, he'd also made contact with Kim Schwartz, the mother of 7-year-old Amber Schwartz, who'd gone missing in June of the same year. Both mothers reportedly told police they did not have a good feeling about Binder, and that he persisted in contacting them regarding the developments in both cases. In an eerie coincidence, Binder had written a letter to the police after Amber had disappeared. In the letter, he claimed that the next child to go missing would be a 9-year-old girl, and weirdly enough, Michaela was the next child reported missing. In early December, Binder also sent a Christmas card to an FBI profiler with a picture of a girl holding up 4 fingers. On December 27, 1991, Amanda Campbell, who was aged 4, went missing from her home in Fairfield. Binder was also linked to the disappearance of 13-year-old Eileen Michelhoff from Dublin in California. In the turn of events, his generally strange behavior and interest in these cases started to garner him media attention. His name had become synonymous with the recent spate of child abductions, and people turned against him. Binder and his family were being harassed by the public, who wanted answers for all the kidnappings. He eventually sued the city of Fairfield for defamation and won the case. Investigators eventually eased off on Binder, with many of the opinion that all he wanted to do was play an important role in the investigation. Beneath all the mysteries, the case continued to captivate the public and challenge the investigators. Christine Anderson had also come under scrutiny following his capture and arrest in August of 2000. Following his arrest, Anderson admitted to the abduction and murder of 7-year-old Ziana Fairchild from Vallejo, California in 1999. In a 2007 interview with the FBI, Anderson claimed to have killed another 13 women and girls. He also alleged to have abducted and murdered 7-year-old Amber Swartz, who he saw standing on a street corner. Before he could provide investigators with more information, though, he died on December 9, 2007, from kidney and liver failure. Investigators looked into Anderson's background after his confession about killing multiple girls in his past. Records show that Anderson was pulled over in 1989 while driving a brown 1977 Chevy sedan that matched the vehicle description given by Katrina as well. However, his death left investigators unable to probe that line of investigation. Hope wasn't lost, though. The renewed effort of investigators brought Michaela's kidnapping back into the spotlight, and with it, more attention and new leads. Another twist comes in August 2012. Wesley Shermantine, who was one half of the murderous duo known as the Speed Freaks, contacted the Stockton Record following the suicide of his partner in crime, Lauren Herzog, in January of that year. He pointed out that Herzog bore a striking resemblance to the composite of the suspect in Michaela's case. This was strengthened by Katrina's comments that Herzog had features that looked very much like the man who kidnapped Michaela. At the direction of Shermantine, investigators began digging up a well in Linden, California, where the duo allegedly disposed of their victims. Thousands of bone fragments were discovered, some of which were believed to belong to Michaela. While the investigators never left hope of solving the case, the mystery kept baffling them further. 8 more years would pass before investigators could find a promising lead. The events that took place during this crime were truly shocking and left a lasting impact on the public. But the real shocker was yet to come. On December 21, 2020, the Haywood Police Department and FBI announced that they'd made an arrest in the case of Michaela Garrett. David Misch, who was 61 years old as of 2022, was charged with the kidnapping and murder of Michaela after his fingerprints were linked, using new technology, to those lifted from the scooter in 1988. We can announce that 59-year-old David Misch had been charged with the murder of Michaela Garrett. He is in custody at Santa Rita Jail, here at Alameda County. A look into Misch's background painted a shocking picture of a man who escaped justice for far too long. David Emery Misch was born on February 19, 1961, in Chicago, Illinois. Not much is known about his life growing up, but by the time he was 16, he had already begun his life of crime. In 1977, Misch was convicted of breaking and entering a property and sexually assaulting a maid at knife point. He was arrested but was paroled only a year later in 1978. In February 1979, he was arrested on charges of false imprisonment and assault with a deadly weapon. Those charges were later updated to assault with intent to rape. Once again, he would qualify for parole in September 1981. May 1988. He was arrested for burglary at a San Leandro grocery store and sentenced to 1 year in prison and 1 year probation. He was, however, released 6 months later in November of the same year. Karma finally caught up with them in December 1988. 38-year-old Margaret Ball was a longtime friend of Misch who often helped him out in a tough spot. It's not certain what transpired between the two, but Margaret was discovered by her stepdaughter beaten and stabbed to death in a pool of blood. The beating was so severe that her front tooth was found a few feet away from her body. Police were alerted to Misch as the suspect, as they would later find evidence linking him to the crime. He was arrested and convicted of Margaret's murder. He was sentenced to 18 years to life in 2018 while he was still incarcerated for Margaret Ball's murder. DNA evidence linked Mish to another double homicide in Fremont, California in 1986. 18-year-old Michelle Xavier and her best friend, 20-year-old Jennifer Dewey, went there to celebrate a birthday dinner of a family member on February 2, 1986. After leaving the restaurant, the young women drove to a convenience store before going home. Shortly after midnight, though, a motorcyclist found both women's bodies on the side of the road. They were stripped naked, and they'd been stabbed and shot. Later, an autopsy revealed that they were also sexually assaulted. Michelle's car was found 6 miles from the crime scene in the parking lot of a grocery store. The case was highly publicized, and rewards were offered, but over the years, all leads and tips would fizzle out, and the case went cold. 32 years later, DNA technology would lead detectives to David Mish. David Mish was charged with another 3 counts of murder and 1 for abduction as he serves out his current sentence. Alameda District Attorney Nancy O'Malley said that Mish had been charged with murder and 2 special circumstances. If found guilty, he could be given a death sentence. Hayward Police Chief Tony Chaplin said the disappearance of Michaela Garrett was a tragic story that gripped the Bay Area for decades. He said they were not going to stop the search for Michaela's body and remains hopeful that they'll find her. Michaela's father, Rod Garrett, drove over 100 miles to attend the press conference. Rod said he finds some relief knowing Mish has been identified after all these years. "I'm kind of relieved that they caught someone over it, so now I don't they've got a suspect they can grill, and hopefully he'll cough up wherever the body is," he said. Sharing, who'd been diagnosed with metastatic cancer back in 2019, was unable to attend the press conference. Police Chief Tony Chaplin read a statement on her behalf. "In the last year, I had to come to a place of acceptance that Michaela was probably no longer alive. But somehow, that acceptance was far more wrapped up in the idea of Michaela sitting on a fluffy thin cloud, walking on streets of gold, dancing on grassy hills, soaring among the stars. What I did not envision was my daughter as a dead child. It was only when I heard this news that this vision of reality appeared, and I've honestly not figured out what to do with it." Mish's attorney, Arnie Castillo, has been outspoken about the case involving his client. He blasted the investigation, calling the methods used to charge Mish as junk science. He said that the sudden match of the handprint after 32 years just seemed ridiculous. Castillo insists that the police are trying to pin all the blame on Mish as an easy way to close the case. Now a middle-aged woman, Katrina Rodriguez, who married and moved away from Hayward to Texas, still harbors guilt over what happened that fateful Saturday morning. In her mind, it was meant to be her because the scooter that was moved belonged to Katrina. This burden of guilt has driven Katrina to forget her childhood. For Sharing, she dedicated her entire life to finding Michaela. First, she waited at the door of the telephone, and as the years passed, she turned to the internet, searching. Sharing eventually started a blog called Dear Michaela. Later, she changed it to Seeker's Road. Sharon was eventually diagnosed with cancer, and after Mish was charged with Michaela's murder, the fight slowly faded out of her. She knew she would see her daughter soon. Sharon passed away in May 2022. There was one last twist to come in this already puzzling case. As David Mish awaits trial on the charges of kidnapping and murder in the case of Michaela Garrett and the murders of Michelle Xavier and Jennifer Dewey, new Alameda County District Attorney Pamela Price created a ripple among those who had been invested in seeing David Mish pay for his crimes. Price is drawing criticism after making the decision to drop all special circumstances in the 3 crimes. If convicted of all 3 counts of murder, Mish no longer faces life in prison without parole or the death penalty. After waiting 3 decades to see Mish pay for his crimes, family, friends, and supporters from Michaela might have to face the reality that Mish could get away with his crimes without facing the appropriate justice. Child safety advocate Michael Claus, who's the father of Polly Claus, who was abducted and killed in 1993, said it was a complete and utter betrayal. Mish's defense attorney, Evie Castillo, welcomed the news. Each case relies heavily on questionable forensic tactics. Price's decision doesn't surprise me. In fact, It acknowledges the weakness in the case, he said. Retired Fremont Lieutenant Chuck Golyar, who worked on the 1986 and the Shel-Xavier and Jaffer Dewey murders, for which Mish has also been charged, said, "I think there's exceptions to every rule, and if anybody ever deserved maximum punishment, it's David Mish." A former prosecutor and KTVU legal analyst called the move reckless and said it was not a good idea to take any kind of punishment off the table from the get-go. As Michaela's body has still not been found, it could be a bargaining chip for later. This is the poster case for putting someone in prison forever to keep them away from society. David Mish awaits trial on 3 charges of murder and 1 of kidnapping. The case of Michaela Garrett has been a story filled with twists and turns that began with a case of mistaken identity that cost law enforcement the first crucial 48 hours of the investigation. It kept a family grasping at straws for decades. And now it may give an alleged killer the opportunity to deny any involvement and keep the truth of a little girl's body's whereabouts a mystery. What do you think of the case? March 14th, 2003. The Hobbit Pub, Southampton, England. On that evening, everyone at this pub was chilling out. Among them were a girl named Hannah Foster and her friend. Both of them were having a great time there, and when they felt it was getting late, both friends left the pub by 10:50 p.m. Now, since it was quite late at night, Hannah Foster's friend caught a bus from a road named Portswood and headed home. On the other hand, Hannah started walking home because her house was just 800 meters away, roughly 0.5 miles. 3 people lived in Hannah's house: her father, Trevor Foster, her mother, Hilary Foster, and her younger sister, Sarah. The Fosters were early sleepers and early risers, so they usually went to bed early. They assumed that their daughter would come home, eat, and then go to bed on her own. However, when Hannah's mother woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, she couldn't find Hannah anywhere in the house. Normally, it wouldn't take Hannah more than half an hour to come home, but now several hours had passed. Therefore, Hannah's mother, Hilary, called her daughter, but Hannah wasn't answering any calls. After this, gradually Hannah's father and younger sister also come to know about her. Following this, Hannah's father, Trevor Foster, calls the girl with whom Hannah went to the Hobbit Pub the previous night, but she tells the same story that I've already told you. After this, Hannah's family also tries to find her themselves, but by now it was already 10:30 in the morning, so Hannah's father starts to worry a lot about his daughter. Because of this, he goes to the Southampton police station and files a missing complaint for him. Now the police start investigating the missing person case from their side and first trace her phone. Well, the good thing was that Hannah's phone was active, and the police traced the phone through the mobile towers. Naturally, the location of Hannah's phone was showing approximately 20 to 25 miles away from her home. Now the police reached there within an hour. Where the police found Hannah's phone was the city's recycling center, and along with the phone, they also found Hannah's bag there, but Hannah was not found. On March 15th, Hannah is also extensively searched for, but her whereabouts are not found. As they continue the search, March 16th arrives, and Southampton police receive a call from an anonymous man from the outskirts of the city. He informs them that he has just seen a girl's body in the bushes. A police team is dispatched to the location provided by the man. Since the previous day, the police had been searching for Hannah Foster, and they also had her picture. Therefore, the police first compare Hannah's picture with the discovered dead body, and they believe it to be Hannah Foster's. Subsequently, Hannah's family is also summoned, and upon seeing a member of their family in this condition, they become quite emotional. Nonetheless, the body is then sent for post-mortem. The police have to wait for several hours for it. However, when the post-mortem report arrives, it states that Hannah was first raped and then murdered by strangulation. However, some traces of the killer's semen were found on Hannah's clothes, and this made the police believe that the case would be solved soon, because DNA would be extracted from the semen and matched with the database to find the killer. But the police's imagination proved wrong when the DNA sample of the killer was not found in their database. Anyway, here the police, losing hope, check Hannah's call details which leads the investigators to take another step towards solving this case. Actually, Hannah had last called the emergency number 999 from her phone, and the operator had answered the call. The call lasted for 50 seconds. After that, the police reached the operator and collect Hannah's call recording from there. In addition, the operator said, "I kept saying, 'This is emergency helpline, what's an emergency?' for 50 seconds, but there was no response from the other end." When investigators enhanced the recording of Hannah's call, they realized that she is sitting in a moving vehicle. Additionally, there is another faint voice with a South Asian accent. The man asks Hannah questions while she sits quietly, appearing scared and intimidated. After obtaining the call recording, the investigating team accelerates progress in Hannah Foster's murder case. Now, the police also check all the CCTV cameras in the area where Hannah's friend last bid her farewell and caught a bus. After scrutinizing several CCTV footages from that road, the police eventually narrow down to 7 suspect vehicles. On the other hand, Hannah's parents are eager to see their daughter's killer brought to justice swiftly. They now also discuss these 7 vehicles in public. In the meantime, on March 26th, Hannah's parents talked to people through a local crime TV show called Crime Watch about those cars. As a result, it emerged that one of the 7 suspect vehicles shown on TV was a van belonging to their company, Hazelwood Foods. The supervisor, James Dennis, called in and said that the driver of this van does not have his own vehicle, so he also uses this van to come and go from his home. Furthermore, that night, the driver had gone to deliver on this road. The time and location of the van were exactly where Hannah had started to walk home alone. After that, the police get a good lead for the first time in this case. The man driving the van was named Maninder Pal Singh Kohli. Upon speaking to the company's supervisor, it was found that on the morning of March 15th, Maninder Pal came to work, but there were some marks on his face, whereas there were no marks on his face the previous day, that is on the 14th. Additionally, on March 15th, Maninder only worked half a day and then took half a day off citing a back pain reason. However, it was only later discovered by the police that Maninder hadn't returned to work since that day. Now, hearing the whole story, investigating officers along with forensic experts arrived at Hazelwood Company. Subsequently, the van driven by Maninder was thoroughly examined by forensic experts, and some traces of semen and blood were found in his vehicle as well. With all this evidence, such as Maninder Pal's disappearance, finding semen and blood in his van, they were pointing fingers directly at him for Hannah's murder. However, apart from this, the police once again scrutinized Maninder Pal's van through CCTV cameras, and it becomes clear from the CCTV footage that Maninder Pal had taken his van to the recycling center on the night of March 14th, and where Hannah's body was found, his van had also passed through that road. Maninder Pal had now become the prime suspect for the police. Therefore, the police now embark on the search for Maninder Pal, and first they go to his home address, obtained from the sandwich company where he used to work. There, Maninder Pal's wife and 2 children used to live, and his wife was a citizen of the UK. But upon reaching there, the police learn something that completely changes the course of the case. In fact, Maninder's wife reveals that he had actually left for India on March 18th because Maninder's mother was very ill. After learning this, it was imperative for the Southampton police to apprehend Maninder Pal in the Hannah Foster murder case, but it was equally challenging. And then, amidst all this, when a blood sample is taken from one of Maninder Pal's sons and the DNA is extracted from it, it matches the DNA found on Hannah's clothes and inside Maninder Pal's van. Now, because a son inherits about half of his father's genes, therefore, the DNA of both the father and son is approximately 99.99% identical. It had already been confirmed that Maninder Pal was indeed the real culprit. After that, the police from England contacts India through the government. Now, since Maninder Pal's ancestral home was in the city of Chandigarh in India, assistance is sought from the police there. Subsequently, the Chandigarh police obtained the address of Maninder's house and reached there. Here, the police find out that Maninder Pal had come to meet his mother a few days ago, but after staying there for 3 to 4 days, he left. Since then, he has not contacted his home. The police also learn another piece of information from Maninder Pal's family at home, that when he was in England, he used to wear a turban and keep a beard. But when he came to India, he got a clean shave and also got his hair cut. Until now, Hannah's parents had also found out about their daughter's killer, and they were also waiting for him to be caught. But now, the Chandigarh police was not giving this case much priority. By this time, the news of this case had not even appeared in the Indian media, so normal people didn't know much about it. As time passed slowly, there was not much progress in the investigation. A considerable amount of time had passed, so Hannah's parents took it upon themselves to catch the killer. Then, about 15 months after their daughter's death on July 10, 2004, they come to India. At this time, they were only in India for 10 days. After that, they come straight to Chandigarh and speak to the local media there, appealing to catch their daughter's killer, Maninder Pal. Apart from this, Hannah's parents had separate pictures of Maninder. In one photo, he had a beard and a turban, while in another photo, he had shaved his beard and cut his hair. It was easy to identify Maninder through these pictures. After this, Hannah's parents waited for a few days. But then they decided to go to Delhi because there are national and international media offices. Harry and I made a promise that we wouldn't wreck. After this step by Hannah's parents, the news of their daughter's murder spread throughout India within 24 hours. The headline of every newspaper and news channel became Hannah Foster and Maninder Pal. Here, Hannah's parents also arranged a free hotline so that anyone who knew about the murderer could call this number. The Southampton police here announced through a news agency called The Sun that they would give 5 million Indian rupees to the person who provides any information about Maninder Pal. By now, this news had spread like wildfire throughout India. Then, on July 15, 2004, a car driver residing in the city of Darjeeling, in the state of West Bengal, India, called a retired police officer whom he knew. Now this police officer had already retired. The driver called the officer and told him, "There is a man who has been living here for a few months, and his appearance resembles that of Hannah Foster's killer, as shown in the news. He started appearing here shortly after Hannah's murder." Upon hearing the driver's words, the retired officer immediately sets out to see this man. The officer remembered Maninder Pal's face because they were following this case through the news channel. Afterwards, when that driver showed the police officer the man, the officer was quite surprised. Then he immediately contacted the local police, and the local police caught Maninder Pal in the bus, going from Kalimpong town to Nepal. Here, the police find out that Maninder Pal was planning to flee to Nepal after seeing his news on TV channels and newspapers. Besides, the police also find out that Maninder Pal had changed his name to Mike Davis in West Bengal. In addition to Maninder, there was also a woman on the bus, and then it was revealed that Maninder had remarried after coming to India. Now, Maninder was arrested and brought to Delhi, and during the custody of a few days here, Maninder confessed to his crime. Then he told the whole story of how he murdered Hannah that night. The story was something like this. Actually, on the night of March 14th, 2003, Maninder was parked on that road drinking in his van where Hannah passed by. But when he saw Hannah, bad thoughts started coming to his mind. Afterwards, he forcibly kidnapped Hannah and placed her in the van. Although there, Hannah requested to be released from Maninder, but Maninder paid no heed to her requests. In the meantime, Hannah also called the emergency helpline number, but due to Maninder's presence, she couldn't say anything. This led the call operator to believe it might be a missed dial. Later, Maninder takes Hannah to a deserted area and rapes her. However, after committing the crime, he realizes that if he lets Hannah go alive, she will go to the police and file a complaint. Therefore, Maninder strangles her to death. Then he disposes of Hannah's body where it was found. On March 15th, the next day, Meninder takes half a day off from work under the pretext of a back pain. But he had Hannah's mobile phone and handbag with him, so he dumps them in a recycling bin at the city recycling center. Afterwards, he goes to one of his friends and asks for some money on loan because he had to go to India to meet his sick mother. However, his friend doesn't have as much money as Meninder needed. Then Meninder comes back home and also tells his British wife that his mother is sick in India and he needs to go there and requires some money. Understanding Meninder's need, his wife talks to her father, and on March 17th, Meninder's father-in-law lends him some money. The very next day, Meninder catches a flight to India. However, the excuse of his mother being sick was just a pretext. In reality, Meninder had come to India to escape from the England police. Upon arriving in India, Meninder goes to Chandigarh, his ancestral home, meets his mother, but here he completely changes his appearance. After changing his appearance, Meninder goes to Darjeeling, and after some time he changes his name and marries another woman there, where he starts living thereafter. Now, because neither anyone in India knew about Hannah Foster's murder nor about Meninder Pal, Meninder wasn't caught for 15 months. But then, when Hannah's parents come to India, only then is Meninder caught. Anyway, after that, Meninder is brought to Delhi, and then on July 28, 2004, giving an interview to a news channel, he confessed his crime on TV.
Unless they look that she's looking. Just stick like that, and like you know, they're on that road, and let's all head out in. Then I stop right or
But upon the whole incident, while confessing, Meninder denies and says, "That night I had drunk a lot. I didn't want to kill Hannah, but when I left her, then Hannah started threatening to complain to the police. Although I threatened her a lot, but she didn't agree, which led me to kill her."
I wrote up a long bed night. But that my mother is very ill in India. I want to work with the eyes though. It is very, very fragile upon me, that her, that beer I was probably black that night, my hand was, and I done that going.
However, in August 2004, Meninder Pal changed his statement. He said, "I didn't do all this willingly, but it was done to me forcibly." After this statement, Meninder was placed under judicial custody in Delhi, and then the process of extradition to Britain begins. This process takes about 3 years, but finally on June 8, 2007, the court granted permission for Meninder Pal to go to England. Once in England, Hampshire police arrest Meninder. Then Meninder's blood sample is taken, and it matches 100% with the DNA found from Hannah's clothes and semen obtained from the van. After that, from December 10, 2007, the trial begins in the Winchester Crown Court. Here, Meninder appeals not guilty to all the charges against him. Meninder said, "That night, some criminals broke the window of the van and threw Hannah's body inside the van. Now, because they was drunk, to trap me, those criminals forced me to rape Hannah, and they may even force to kill her." Even in court, Haslewood Foods Company supervisor James Dennis testified, but Meninder said, "I borrowed 16,000 euros from James, and he is also under the misconception that I am having an affair with his wife. That's why James is targeting me." Meninder also said, "Maybe James hired those 3 men to frame me and forced me to commit this crime on the night of March 14th. But in the end, when the police investigated Meninder Pal's all statements, it all turned out to be lies. And finally, on November 25, 2008, all the allegations against Meninder Pal were proven. After that, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Now he will be imprisoned without parole for at least 24 years. At the time of sentencing, he was 41 years old, and he will remain in jail until 2030. Of the 5 million rupees reward offered for catching Meninder Pal, 367,000 rupees were given to the taxi driver who first informed the police about Meninder Pal. With this, the money was divided among 12 other people, because besides the taxi driver Jason Lepsha, those people also played an important role in solving this case. However, Jason used that money to buy land and then established a school for disadvantaged children on it, named the Hannah Memorial Academy in Foster's memory. Then, in 2006, when Hannah's parents visited Darjeeling and learned about this, they were very pleased. When these people returned to England, Hannah's parents started a registered charity to help Jason along with other people. This now greatly helps Jason Lepsher's school. So friends, this was the complete story of the Hannah Foster murder case. If you appreciate our efforts, like and share this video. If you haven't subscribed, do so now. Thank you.